All right. Welcome all. Hello and welcome to the hybrid conference, Games for Preserving Cultural Heritage in Visby, Zoom and Facebook. The conference aims to analyze the ways cultural heritage is depicted in games, examining its authenticity, depth and the ethical considerations, and to examine best practices. The conference hopes to enable interdisciplinary dialogue between academia, the game industry, and cultural heritage professionals, and highlights the need to preserve games as significant cultural artifacts. The conference is organized by the Uppsala University Game Design Master Students Play and Preserve International Team consisting of Ottar Paulus, Evangelia Sotirio, Marcina Zepravska, Catherine Salambir, Fateme Mohammadi, Jingchuan Tai, Adrian Loboda, and Angela Primliu. Special thanks to Abe Paulus from ICOMOS and all the presenters for their cooperation. The conference is moderated by me. My name is Ottar Paulus. I am master student in Uppsala University, Department of Game Design. I will be keeping track and leading the questions and answers session after each presentation. To quickly go over, each presenter has 45 minutes for their part. This includes questions and answers. Please write any questions to have in either Facebook, Zoom, or raise your hand at the end of the presentation. We also now have a Discord server, link to which can be found on our Facebook event. You can also use our Discord server for asking questions. At the end of each presentation, I will say them out. Technical help is provided by Ando Urbas, Stream IT. He will let us know when some adjustments are needed. Before we start with the presentation, I would also like to mention that the program has two parts. It will start off with Angela, Anastasios, and Richard, who will be speaking from 10:15 to 11:45. Then we have about an hour-long break for you to have some lunch. And for those in person in Visby, there is coffee and cake here as well. The afternoon starts at 1 p.m. sharp and lasts until you enjoy the conference, and we have a lively discussion after each presentation. And now the heroes of the day, the presenters. I am honored to present our first speaker, Angela, from the Department of Archival, Library and Information Studies, University of West Africa, speak about games developed at HCI-VR. Good morning. Are you with us? The floor is yours.
Yes, it's just 1 second because I think my Zoom is stuck. So I'll try my best to share. Okay. Okay, please tell me if everything is okay. If you can see my presentation.
It shows that you've started sharing and we can see the screen now. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I will present to you all the games we have developed at the HCI-VR lab at the University of Peloponnese in Greece. And the place is there up in the mountains of Peloponnese in the south parts of Greece. And the lab is dedicated to the analysis, design, development, and evaluation of HCI-VR systems and applications. But we particularly specialize in games, and most of them are cultural heritage games. And here you can see some of the team members. Before I start by showing you different examples, I want to go very quickly through two very important theoretical frameworks that I find very useful when we design games. And I'll start from the bottom here. And when you design a game for cultural heritage, you need to understand the different organizational characteristics. If you don't respect the organizational characteristics, then you will have a lot of organizational resistance. And then whatever you design, no matter how good it is, it might fail. So we need to respect different issues like budget, but most importantly, we need to respect whether we put new work demands on the museum personnel. So basically, if you have a game that requires museum staff to work extra, then they will sabotage it and it will not work unless the people in the museum or the people of the cultural heritage side feel that they own this. And the way to do it is by incorporating them in the design of the different games. You also need to respect the different player characteristics. Now, I'm giving you here a few stuff, but I'm not going to go into detail. But basically, there are people that go to museums and cultural heritage sites for different reasons. There are different needs, different interests, different age groups, different physical levels of activity. So you need to respect that when you design something. And of course, then is the game characteristics themselves. And you can see here different things. Not going to go into detail, but it's important to decide the level of complexity, to decide the type of technology you will use, and to decide what type of game theme you will use. Another thing I find very interesting, not just when you design games for cultural heritage, but when we design any kind of experience in cultural heritage, is the contextual model of the cultural experience by Falk and Dirking. Now, this is quite simple, but what it says, but if you keep that in mind, it helps you structure your work. Now, basically, when you visit a cultural heritage site, you have a personal context. You go there because you have your own needs, as we said before. You go there. I go there with my daughter because we want to have a good time together, or I go there on my own because I want to learn something, or I go there with friends because I want us to have a meaningful experience. So this is the personal context and the different needs you have. Of course, there's the socio-cultural context. And this is, just keep in mind that any cultural experience is never a solo experience. It's always a social one. Even if you visit on your own, once you're at the cultural heritage venue, then you have interactions with others, even if it is just looking at others and feeling their bodies around you. And of course, it's the physical context, and that is super important because you need to consider to understand the space in which your game will be implemented. So think that you have a museum that it has very narrow spaces. If you put an interactive table there with lots of interactive activities and games, then you might create a huge visitor traffic, and that might sabotage your game. So you need to consider physical context aspects. And last but not least is the temporality aspects of the visit, the duration of your game, when you will present this game to the visitor. Will it be halfway through their visit? Will it be after their visit? All these are important decisions to make, and make them consciously. So games, but what for? We can use cultural heritage games to promote a site. We can use them to engage visitors. We can also use them to understand visitor needs. We can use them to allow socialization and all sorts of things. Whatever you come up with, it might be valid. And here I'll give you some examples. Just keep in mind that all these examples I'll show you, they are designed and implemented by students and undergraduate and postgraduate students at the lab. This game is a very simple game. It's teaching kids to not only to look at things, but to see things, to understand the details. Now, the details in ancient artwork and in any type of artwork are very important because they can reveal aspects of that society. So it's a girl holding a rabbit, not because she thinks the rabbit is just cute, but because there are social reasons behind that. And we wanted kids to understand and try to learn to observe. Now, another game here is made for the sanctuary of Ravrona. This is very close to Athens airport, that site. But what happens in antiquity and what happens, throughout the world, you have ancient buildings, ancient constructions, and later on people take parts of these buildings to build newer constructions. So in this case, you have a lot of missing parts from that temple that they were used to build a later church and so on. So here we ask kids to find these missing parts, collect them from different newer constructions, and complete the puzzle to reveal the reconstruction of the ancient site. Just now, everything is perfect and it worked. Both games were happy, kids were happy playing them, and they all worked. But when we try to understand if they actually learned something, then we realize that they did not learn anything. They just thought the puzzle is just a puzzle. They didn't make the connection between the puzzle and the reuse of materials in newer buildings. And this is because the game was standing on its own. So when you want to have a game to support learning, then that should be a part of a wider educational activity, and it can rarely stand on its own. So that's one of the big lessons here. Now, you can have games that they can build on school curriculum, and this is the Hercules missions. This is a part of Greek school curriculum, mythology, and you can play this game. It's a complex game that takes students through the Hercules missions. Students were happy, they played it, and actually here they understood it because it was a part of the school curriculum, they had some previous knowledge, and the teachers could build on this further. And here, it's another game trying to teach historical photography. Now here you pick the right photograph and you put it in the right film strip. And then as you play, you gain points. But what we realized is that what is very, very important is also the game input modalities. You can have games that you can play using a mouse, but you can have games that you can play using joysticks, or you can play using your whole body interaction. And that seems to have a significant difference in the way people perceive not only the game, but the experience itself. So although whole body interaction was a lot more difficult to use than a simple mouse input, visitors seem to prefer this and to like it, and we had confirmed these findings with physiological data. Now, games to enhance learning, games to enhance cultural experience, but here are games to help you understand your user. Basically, they can games to help you make profiles of visitors, and then later on, while they're at the museum, you can help them with personalized experiences. Now, in this game, for example, participants had to choose an avatar. What they did not know is that each avatar was correlated with specific personality dimensions, and each personality dimension was further correlated with specific cognitive needs. So people chose their avatars, and they had different things they did during the game, but that allowed the system to make a pretty good profile of these visitors' needs. Here we have another one. This is one of these very popular, quite silly games you do on social media. Choose your favorite color, and I'll tell you your personality. These small things people do. But this was quite successful because they used 12 questions, and people answer to these questions to find who would be their protective goddess in antiquity, and in the end you would have Athena is protecting you, but the museum made a pretty accurate cognitive profile of the visitors. So these games help you make profiles and help you further personalize the experience. Excuse me. So you have personalization that is very useful before the visit, because when you make the profile and then you go at the museum, and then you could have a pretty good matching of the content with your needs and preferences. But you can also use games to support the cultural experience after the visit. And this is one of these games. It was a museum escape room. And you had to solve certain riddles in order to escape in time before the whole building collapsed. In order to answer these riddles, to solve these riddles, you had to visit the museum previously, and also use an app, a dedicated app that made the presented content for 10 to 15 pre-selected items. So you had to have a good museum experience using the app, and then you could go on and play the game, the Museum Escape, at home later on, and that would keep you continue the engagement with the cultural side. Now, this game had 2 levels. The easy level that I barely managed to do, but the difficult level, it was just the students managed to do. So I think, they made it hard. But it was interesting because people kept on playing and kept on discovering certain things regarding the different museum objects. Now, we can play during the visit. That is something that people are debating. Some people say it's not good to have games during the visit because that distracts people from the cultural content. And other people say, well, use games during the visit because then you will help people to lower museum fatigue, do something different, and actually help them socialize. And this is two projects that we were not directly involved in making, but here we were indirectly involved in the design because we gave different content, and here we were involved in the evaluation. Now, what you did in this one, you had an app, you went to the gallery, and you used different paintings to make narratives about the paintings, and the people, the other players, they had to guess from the narration which painting that was, and you would get points whether you guessed correctly or not. And this is another game that used 4 different cultural heritage venues, one in Greece, one in Italy, one in Spain, and one in Portugal. And it asked participants to have an appointment and gather at 11 o'clock, say 11 o'clock, at the different locations, and that they could compete against each other. So the people from Greece could play and compete against the people in Spain or against the people in Portugal. And the whole point was to find associations between the different venues. So in a question here is, what did Hadrian, Louis XIII of France, and Ludwig II of Bavaria have in common? They were skilled sculptors, they were left-handed, they were born in Cairn, Spain, they were homosexual. And just the answer is they were born in Cairn, Spain. But people had to compete. They loved it. We saw people coming to the venues just to play these games, and they had a very meaningful social experience. You can also use games to promote cultural heritage sites. Excuse me. These are very simple games, and these are the snakes and ladders games, or these are simple avoiding thunderbolt games. Very simple, very easy, but people seem to get hooked on those games. So if you make a successful mini game that hooks people on it, then you can use it to promote a cultural heritage site. So if you can have it release it on social media, like a social media campaign, then that could attract attention to your heritage site. Now, from mobile games to augmented reality, virtual reality, Internet of Things, and more, we have all these different types of applications that we work with and different types of technologies we work with. And augmented reality, we have done quite a lot of things. And also Internet of Things, we are experimenting because we are asking different museum objects to communicate with other museum objects and create different narratives. But today we will focus on the virtual reality systems we have at the lab. And this is the end of the boring stuff. And now my colleague Tassos will take over. So thank you very much. And I think we can do the questions afterwards, if you agree.
Yes, absolutely. So yeah, as Angela said, next we will have Anastasios from Department of Performing and Digital Arts, University of the Peloponnese, Greece. He will speak about the Moby Cave live presentation, Gaming in Motion. Anastasios, take it away.
Thank you both. Thank you, Angela. So just before we have a live demonstration of what we have built here in the HCI-VR lab, I'll have a short introduction about the Moby Cave, a custom-made room-scale cave that we have built here. So the idea is that we have this setup that you will see here. It is a simplified cave system. It consists of 3 walls and 15 screens. Each one is led by a different GPU, and all come in one PC that leads this. There is also a floor projection, and users can be there without wearing any glasses, any HMDs, or even any controllers, since it consists of a motion tracking technology system. There are two cameras that track the full body movements of the player, and that they translate them into meaningful actions within the virtual world. So this is a cave setup that the idea is that not only immerses the player, but also uses the spatiality, the room to do things. So the ability to walk around and physically engage within the game world adds a deeper level of embodiment. And from some preliminary experiments that we have run, it seems that can be integrated very good with cultural heritage projects. So some things about the process behind this cave system that we will demonstrate in a while. Here you can see the development process that we followed. It is structured in as a three-part process. In the first phase, we focused on defining the scope. So we have to build a cave and taking into consideration the users and their needs, and specifically in getting that close to cultural heritage. In the second phase, we shifted our focus to the VR environment itself, which included layout and design to ensure the user experience. And so we had some scenarios to create a gaming experience alongside with hardware components that we used. And lastly, we tested implemented the designed VR setup through some experiments and came back to change some things. So we had some goals in this setup. One of them was the scalability, and the Moby Cave name came in terms that this can be transferred to cultural venues, let's say, easily. And one big issue here is that we wanted to have shareable experiences for the bystanders, so they can be part of what they see. So we have some games built for this setup. One of them is that we will present you today. Here you can see some images of the assembly process. All this installation of the multiple screens in the setup was custom made, as I said, and we had to deal with many issues here, getting things work. And not only in the physical construction, but also to the software setup. Since as I said, each screen comes to different GPUs, so we used the mosaic technology to have this seamless integration across the screens and get things work. So what we will see today is this game. It's called Prometheus Unbound. The primary goal of this game is to promote the cultural heritage of the Peloponnese region, and particularly focusing on the castle of Methoni. It is located in the southwestern coast of Peloponnese, and we had to design around this specific site. It's the images you see in this slide. And we took into account the historical and social context of the area, and also reflecting to the significance of this landmark. So we built a game, and just as Prometheus defied the gods to bring fire to humanity, we had this simplified transfer here, since the physical body of the player is the unbound from traditional controllers, and he has to interact with and navigate within the game with his body. So actually this is an escape room. The mechanics mirrors escape rooms. The player has to solve riddles and gets to the end within a limited time. So there were some milestones within this project, getting things from the game design aspect. One of them was incorporating mechanics that will use the human body as a joystick. So we had to translate some gestures to an immersive and easy to go navigation within the system. So we had a ludo-narrative perspective here, and we had this aspect as a game genre that will help us do that. So you will see in a while my colleague here, Bill, to walk and do things around this work just simply by using his body. So the narrative of the game centers around the time travel mishap. There is this concept here, and the players assume the role of a scientists that find themselves in the early of 19th century, and the primary objective is to locate a portal to get to exit the castle within 10 minutes. So he have to solve puzzles and riddles and do all this by his body. Another milestone that we had to deal was to emphasize to the fractured timeline of this game. So as the player is transported to the fortress of Antoniou, we have to use some rooms and places and things within the virtual world that make the history accurate and use their problem-solving skills to deal with that issues. As I said, we had some experience with users. I won't get into that. We have made 2 experiments. Just in a few words, we had to test the immersion and things like usability within this setup, and things were very good in both experiments. We also tested this for bystanders in terms of how they can be part of this experience, which also had very positive and encouraging results. Here you can see some photos of these experiments, and we could shift to our laboratory view here. So I will stop this presentation.
Yeah, I was just going to say that you're running short on time, so just a heads up.
Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Yeah, but it's better, to see some things here. So, I'm here. Here is our master student, Bill Vasiliadis. So, Bill will play the game. I will try to guide him along the way and explain some things as things go.
I'm not sure if we can see the footage at the moment. It shows HCI-VR lab logo. Oh, we can see you now.
You can see me, but we should pin the HCI-VR lab user within the participants if possible. So yes, everybody sees that screen. Thank you.
There we go.
That's great. So this is the environment. So you see Bill here and also this setup. Bill is standing, let's say, 2-3 meters from these screens backwards. And now we're in this introductory phase of the game. There is this jail that he starts. Now there is a little tutorial that shows how he moves around. In order to go back or forward, he has to just to move his right leg a little bit forward or backwards. So now he goes backwards or forwards. There's another tutorial screen here, how he will turn around, go up, down, and left and right.
We don't seem to see the footage at the moment.
Yes, we do.
Oh, we do?
Yes.
We have to see
Oh,
that
now we
screen.
do.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps I'll close my mic here because when I speak, I believe it comes to my...
All is fine.
Yeah.
Everybody can see.
Okay, thank you. So we're here. He has to pick some items. In order to do that, he has to get some seconds within the items. Here he has to light this side of the goal, and he has to find a way to get out from this door. So there is this inventory. He has some items that he picked earlier. Now he's moving to the outer gold. At the top right, Bill, you can get around a little bit here, and we can see a kitchen that he can enter this building. There are some things that he can explore here. There's a fireplace. There is a wooden door here. He has to find a way to open it. There are some barrels. Να το κλείσω. Okay. So he has to open this door. In order to do that, he has to pick some bullets from this little case. It says that it's locked, so he goes to the inventory. He uses the key he picked up earlier, so he can open that. And combining this with a gun he also picked earlier, you can point out this door and this will open. So there is this secret path that he found, which leads him to the interior of the castle. As you see, all these processes that the game encourages him to explore and solve puzzle using his body. Here he found a piece of a map. There's this room, so he also has to find some things in order to open the door and go to the castle. The only limitation within this game is time. You can see at the top of the screen time running down. So the player has to move, let's say, quickly. Now we can use this key to open this door. So he's standing there, he's using his hands and his body to move around. Now he approaches the burji of the ancient Methoni. You can see around it, it's the castle. On the right side, there is this ghost figure character, and following the mythology, he has to give some coins to the character in order to open the door. And that leads him inside the castle, where he sees some signs back there on the wall. And what he has to do is to put them in the right order. To do that, he has to find the pattern. So he has to explore the area. Now he goes up within this tower. You can see some cannons here. There is a letter there which gives the rest of the map he found earlier. Also explains that this was from the government of Antoniou, and describes the process to make these items to the right. It's up there, the right position. So he has to go down there again and put the right order to these 4 symbols. So the idea, again, is there is this way to experience history, combining physical movement, problem solving, and cultural learning in one interactive platform that can be beneficial for bystanders also. Goes to the left, approaches these signs, we turn it down, and he got a message in Greek that says that you managed to do that. So thank you, Bill. So that was a demonstration. I hope you had the view to enjoy it as we do it on site, and I think we're on time.
Yeah. No, it looks really good. I'm really impressed by your work. But yeah, thank you, Angela and Anastasios, for your presentations. We will now move on to the questions. I'm just going to bring them up, and we're going to go through them one by one. So first off, and I'm picking these questions up from different places. Question to Angela. What tools or methods have proven most effective for enhancing visitor engagement?
Well, you have to somehow trigger emotions. That is something we know. It's not just learning. People, it was an old-fashioned notion that people go to museums and cultural heritage sites to learn. They don't go just to learn. They go to socialize. They go to have a good time. So triggering emotions could be something. It's something very important. So I think you can start moving towards that direction. I think that for me is the most important, among other things. Okay.
Yeah. Another question. Have you considered extending your methods to older demographics or professional training contexts?
We have now one project that is involving elders, people over 65, into these VR experiences. And we are working with different heritage issues. One is antiquity, which is okay, but we also work with more recent history, which is more touchy. It has to do with World War. It has to do with Civil War. So there are a lot of emotions there and a lot of topics that are not very easy to handle. So we have 2 different experimental settings, one for sensitive historical issues and one for more neutral heritage issues. All of it is done on virtual reality environments, either desktop or the cave you just saw. And we are collecting self-reports together with physiological data from electroencephalography to test what is happening, to understand what's happening in the older generations' brains when they have these kinds of experiences, because it could be a way to reduce dementia and improve quality of life. So that is something we work on now.
Yeah, that sounds really fascinating.
Yeah, the project is called Firefly, if you want to have a look. Firefly project.
Oh, Firefly. Got it. Last question for you. When the players were just solving the puzzle, what were they supposed to learn? And was that meaningful and important to them, or maybe decided by the teachers? What was the players' take on the experience, and did it need to change from their perspective?
We wanted to teach students about the reuse of materials from antiquity to constructions, later constructions. So basically, a lot of Greek churches, Orthodox churches, will build by using material from ancient constructions. This was the main point, and teach kids to understand this and see how the people took and reused materials to do that. However, as I said, that was not very obvious. So if you have a game standing on its own, it looked like students did not understand it. They just focused on the puzzle itself, but they did not understand the reuse of materials. So when we checked learning aspects, they didn't learn the way we thought they would. So in order to make that very successful, you need guidance, and you need guidance from teachers, and you need a wider educational framework to make the game work as an extra tool. So you need the discussions, you need the educational plan, and then the game could be a part of that. But on its own, we found out that it's not really working so well.
All right. Now for questions for Anastasius. So first off, how easy is it as a process for someone to learn and use their body as a controller?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, actually, there are a couple of different levels here. Through those experiments that I mentioned earlier, we saw that for younger people, it wasn't that kind of difficult. They could, after some minutes, they could easily get familiar with this process. And there wasn't enough, let's say, cognitive load to what they had to do. So there was also immersion within this. While it seems, again, from our preliminary experiments, it seems that for people aged more, for bigger ages, it's not as easy as the younger, as students, let's say, here in the university. And there is this process that we're trying to make it more easier for all. But yeah, in a wider picture, usability is quite high here.
All right. Next question. How does the use of the human body as a controller enhance or limit the player's sense of embodiment in the Prometheus project? Did the experiments reveal challenges?
Yeah, again, the use of body movements as means of control enhances the sense of embodiment, because it makes players feel physically present in this virtual environment. Of course, it's not the same seeing that from our screens here. It's very difficult. It's very different if you see this physical engagement within this space here, because we found that it's crucial for creating this immersive experience that goes beyond traditional gaming.
All right. And for the last question that we have, what is the takeaway, learning outcome, or goal of the 3D game here?
Yeah, the idea is, as I said to the start of my presentation, to make to have this cave system and make a VR game that's immersive. It uses the body. It creates this 360 space that allows players to move freely, and also a very big advancement here is that it can be also beneficial for bystanders. So the idea is that we can integrate that within cultural heritage institutions where many people can be part of this experience, and also many players can play changing roles simultaneously. That's it.
Right. Great. Well, again, thank you both for being here and presenting your presentations. And now we would be moving on. I am pleased to give the floor to the next speaker, Richard Cole, from the Department of Classics and Ancient History, University of Bristol, UK. The title of the presentation is Virtual Realities as Time Travel. Richard Cole, you may take it away.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Just share. Okay, hopefully this presentation follows on quite nicely from the time travel experiment of the Prometheus project, because the whole presentation is about virtual realities as time travel. So virtual realities are frequently praised for their ability to cast the player back in time. This is true of both historical video games and more recently virtual reality experiences. Such claims can be producer-led, with examples ranging from marketing materials and modding tools to in-game narratives, as well as directed towards the medium in question in op-eds or player reviews, where players themselves reflect on their experiences of historical games and VR as a form of time travel. The potential for time travel in virtual realities appears to be fueled partly by the way in which virtual worlds reconstruct the past, but also by the way in which players explore such realities. Time travel as a metaphor for experiencing the past in historical fictions is itself nothing new. Elizabeth Wesling, in her analysis of Walter Scott's 19th century novels, argued that his particular mode of characterization turned the historical novel into a time machine, one that takes the reader on a diverting sightseeing tour through the past. Virtual realities, though, seem to promise the most compelling realization of this metaphor. This paper outlines some of the findings from a collaborative project I'm leading on the theme of virtual realities as time travel. The project emerged from an international workshop held at the University of Bristol, UK in May 2023, and it was the final workshop of the AHRC-funded Virtual Reality Oracle project, conceived and run by Professor Esther Eidenhow at the University of Bristol. The VR Oracle project created a groundbreaking first-person virtual reality experience of consulting the ancient Greek oracle of Zeus at Dodona in the 5th century BCE. The workshop was a means for myself and the other research associates on the project to explore some of the emerging ideas raised by the VR Oracle. Virtual realities as time travel has since led to the creation of a 12-part special issue featuring academics and industry professionals discussing historical games and VR experiences. The special issue is currently under review by the journal Rethinking History. This paper provides a sneak preview of some of the arguments I've deployed in the framing of the special issue to discuss the relationship between virtual realities, history, and the past. The aim, as you will see, is to better understand the temporal logic that underpins the experiences made possible by historical video games and VR simulations. The paper thus speaks to several underpinning themes of this conference, from the depiction of cultural heritage in games and ways of preserving the past in virtual worlds, to the need for further interdisciplinary dialogue across academia and industry. So, in September 2022, Meta ran an advert campaign on the metaverse that outlined several future applications. The campaign was titled, "The Metaverse may be virtual, but the impact will be real." Alongside proposed public health benefits, support for emergency services, and real-time monitoring of the environment, Meta emphasized the educational benefits. Their case study, ancient history. In the metaverse, history students will be able to go back in time, ran the tagline. How would this work? The idea presented in the campaign launch video suggested that students, by donning headsets in class, would then go back to ancient Rome and hear Mark Antony debate firsthand. In Meta's campaign, the way in which humans would be able to experience the metaverse, for instance, to support healthcare by visualizing a knee scan, and the possibility of the metaverse transporting users to the past, appears to be intentionally blurred. On the one hand, we have technology augmenting the perception of reality in the now, and on the other, we have technology as a gateway to visualizing spaces that no longer exist. The former empowers the user with X-ray vision, while the latter seems to provide temporal vision. Meta's bold assertion, recited in the campaign videos, that the metaverse may be virtual, but the impact will be real, thus suggests a deeper engagement with space and time. This is not about approximating the past, although that is, of course, exactly what Meta are doing, and in selective, questionable ways. Rather, it's about witnessing events as they happened, in a way equivalent to visualizing things not immediately accessible to us in the real world. Although Meta's campaign launch video carried the line, "These students aren't really back in 32 BCE, the implication is that the metaverse will provide unmediated access to historical events as part of virtual field trips. This, Meta promises, is what will enable students to uncover the past. How was Meta's pedagogical vision received? Well, according to tech analyst Benedict Evans, writing in response to Meta's campaign on Twitter, such lofty promises are just embarrassing. The kickback is unsurprising. Meta's advertising projected a particular value of the virtual when it comes to history and pedagogy. That is, students as time-traveling witnesses on temporal field trips, able to personally engage in archaeological discovery. Evans, in his follow-up commentary, painted another. History for Evans is not about watching things. It is not a narrative or reconstruction, but instead about causes and effects. History is about explaining things, such as the internal tensions that led to the collapse of the Roman Republic. This apparently cannot be achieved in VR, which is further compared to watching movies. Other commentators beg to differ, pointing out that one could take such understanding into virtual reconstructions and have the best of both worlds in an interactive experience. Respondents defended Meta's advertising on the basis that VR might well be able to evoke lived experience, incorporate the senses, and ultimately capture a more holistic experience of the past, which would not only support the learning of history through better recall, but also extend it beyond traditional modes of pedagogy. More than just a Twitter rehashing of the philosophy of history, these exchanges reveal how the metaphor of time travel helps to collate and indeed conflate different historiographical modes. In this paper, I'm interested in exploring the metaphorical meaning of time travel when it is attached to historical simulations. To do so, I consider three areas where the metaphor has been deployed. First, I look at how historical video games and VR experiences use time travel to describe the experience on offer. Second, I focus on critical responses that make use of the metaphor. Third, I consider how audiences themselves articulate their experience of historical games in VR as a form of time travel. In all three areas, I'm interested in the relationship between history and the past evoked by the metaphor, as well as how these ideas underpin the production and consumption of virtual histories. My focus here is largely on virtual antiquity, which I define as reality-like experiences of ancient cultures. So historical video games and XR experiences actively sell themselves on the temporal displacement that their simulations offer. This can take a variety of forms depending on genre. Strategy games, for example, position the player as both reader and writer of large-scale histories. Chapman calls such games conceptual simulations for the way in which they abstract historical processes and effectively look down on history. The player, though, is more than just a passive observer, as the tagline of Civilization 6 makes clear: will your civilization stand the test of time? The sense of control over the past embedded in the framing of historical strategy games is perhaps most apparent in the aptly titled TV game show Time Commanders, which made use of the game engine for Rome Total War to allow contestants to replay historical battles under the watchful eye of historical and military experts. While the time travel metaphor is often more implicit than explicit in historical strategy games, what it speaks to is the agency afforded to the player in these simulations. This includes command over historical events, armies, resources, technologies, and entire cultures, as evidenced in the blur for Total War Pharaoh, quote, unearthing a breathtakingly vibrant recreation of the Bronze Age collapse as you battle societal disarray, face natural disasters, and fight to protect your people against waves of invaders. Ubisoft's forthcoming Anno 117 Pax Romana, an installment in the long-running real-time strategy franchise, makes this offering even more apparent. It's your destiny, as the tagline goes, to shape the Roman Empire in the year 117 AD. As governor, you will encourage economic growth or expand your rule through dominance, lead with rebellion, or unite a diverse culture. There is also, however, a sense of control over the historical record implied in how the player will personally unearth the Bronze Age collapse in Total War Pharaoh, or indeed determine how far the Pax Romana will hold in Anno 117. The rhetorical question posed in the marketing for Imperator Rome, a grand strategy game developed by Paradox, takes such claims to their logical conclusion by activating the latent counterfactual possibilities of the genre, quote, can you change the course of history, end quote. The idea that the past is out there, waiting for a contemporary player to make the journey, is satirized in Anno 117's live-action teaser Governor's Wanted video, which as a togaed messenger proclaimed the arrival of the governor to various uninhabited lands before breaking the fourth wall to address the viewer, quote, you can take it from here. Old World, a historical strategy-based game set in antiquity, puts it in more siren-like terms, quote, "the ancient era calls," end quote. Once the player takes up this calling and makes the journey, Old World asks, "This is an era of great leaders, from the revered to the feared. Which will you be?" By raising the possibility of emulation or detraction, the game's paratext suggests how time travel works in historical strategy games, namely that you can take inspiration from historical figures and civilizations while not actually being like them at all. Within the temporal command of historical strategy games exists the potential to not just recapitulate known or even unknown history and set the tone for a new historiography, but also engage in the virtual fieldwork Meta envisages for the metaverse. Thus, Manuel Reinhardt, the creative director for Anno 117, has argued that the game will do more than simply empower players to govern Imperial Rome. It will, quote, "push beyond that and change how people see the Roman Empire in games," end quote, seemingly by making playable lesser-known provinces in the empire. The framing for a Total War saga Troy, also set in the Bronze Age but focused on the narrative of the Trojan War, offers another take on the pedagogical benefits of historical games, suggesting that players will actively be involved in peeling back the layers of myth and legend to reveal the realities that may have inspired them. Finally, critical reviews of strategy games use the time travel metaphor as a way of comparing and contrasting games, with IGN's review of Old World arguing that it, quote, "zooms in both on time and space, telling more intimate and less abstract stories about human society than its ancestors in the Civilization series could." The implication is that a greater attention on the part of the developers to engaging in time travel themselves can act to better support the time traveling of their players. To put it another way, the research that developers undertake, combined with the way in which they make this a part of the game and its mechanics, matters. In Old World, the developers greatly expanded the number of event cards that structure the narrative of historical turn-based strategy games. Old World's 4,000 unique events work to both contextualize what is happening in the game according to the histories and cultures of the period, while also acting as footnotes in publicly accessible articles on such topics. In framing historical strategy games, then, we can posit that the time travel metaphor acts as a bridge between the genre's core dynamics of exploration, expansion, exploitation, combat, conquest, and strategy, and the historical period in question, promising greater or lesser control over the particulars, depending on how far the game is tailored to the era depicted. In action role-playing games, time travel takes on a more embodied element. A recent video to mark the 15th anniversary of the Assassin's Creed franchise clarifies how this functions in practice by bringing together the protagonists from previous games and having them perform a synchronized leap of faith with the words "leap into history" superimposed on the screen. Christian Raymond Scheider restates the sentiment here in a critical review of Assassin's Creed Mirage, noting that the Assassin's Creed game series has been sending gamers back in time since 2007. The idea of the player diving through historical epochs is perhaps most evident in the Time Anonymity trailer for Assassin's Creed Unity, where the player assassin is thrown out of the game setting of the French Revolution and into Paris in World War II. Against the backdrop of 18th century Notre Dame, the trailer depicts an approaching wall of black and red graphics that swiftly encompass the photorealistic cathedral, with a narrator warning the assassin that the French Revolution simulation is collapsing. "I don't know what time period you'll land in, but you need to get out of there." The eponymous character can then be seen fleeing the approaching wall of code before leaping off nearby rooftops into a bright light and landing on a railway, only to narrowly miss being hit by a train in Nazi-occupied Paris. While such videos provide a literal manifestation of Ubisoft's framing for the series, there are more subtle cues that underpin the temporal leap. This includes the way in which Ubisoft goes about recreating periods of history, deploys a narrative that straddles past and present, and offers players the means to explore its reconstructions across different game modes. Ubisoft has a history of working closely with historians to inform the development of the Assassin's Creed franchise. The impact of these collaborations can be seen in recent fan responses, such as the Imagining Time Travel Mechanism in Assassin's Creed concept video. The video suggests how a fully realized time travel mechanic might work using Assassin's Creed as a model. Such an experience would bring together Ubisoft's historical reconstructions in a single platform, making it possible to leap into any one of them. In terms of game narrative, players of installments such as Assassin's Creed Odyssey experience both the historical setting of the Peloponnesian War and the present-day frame story, where modern technology, including VR, becomes the very mechanism that enables the protagonist, and by extent the player, to leap back in time. In terms of the third aspect, Ubisoft has released several installments of the Assassin's Creed franchise with educational discovery tours, which remove the combat to the main game and cutting guided tours of its reconstructed worlds. For Assassin's Creed Odyssey's discovery tour, Ubisoft claims that players will be able to dive into the incredible richness of classical Greece and meet Socrates. Equally, players can ostensibly interact with history like never before, thanks to Odyssey's Story Creator Mode, its modification platform that enables players to create their own stories and import them into Odyssey's world. Whether players play the base game, the Discovery Tour, or create their own story, what unifies these experiences is the reframing of the time travel metaphor as an effective, personal encounter with the past, reached vicariously through the connection players have with their avatar. Time travel in historical RPGs is an embodied experience of reliving historical events, of carving out your own path in the historical narrative, of being close to the artifacts and peoples of different periods and actively engaging with them, all while holding on to a sense of your modern self in the process of performing this impossible behavior. It's not just AAA games, though, that like to preface the experience of history as a form of time travel. Independent developers have followed suit. The temporal leap features strongly in the blurb for the historical adventure game Pentiment. The game, set in 16th century Bavaria, promises players that they will step into a living, illustrated world at a time when Europe is at a crossroads of great religious and political change. The textual environment of the 16th century is key here to evoking the sense of travel, with the player able to engage at length with illustrated manuscripts as a proxy for encountering the lived experience of a variety of townspeople in fictional Tassing and its nearby abbey. The game's opening, cutscenes, dream sequences, glossary, menus, and even some conversations all take place via the medium of text and manuscript illumination. The sense of travel is in many ways through a palimpsest, from the stylized in-game conversational text that responds to the status of individual characters, to the importance of texts within the game world for solving the murder at the heart of the story, not to mention the game's extensive bibliography and wider critical commentary. The result is a layered game world, conscious of its past and its reception, with Roman ruins puncturing the landscape and animated journeys through the Aeneid alongside Easter eggs that allude to Umberto Eco's The Name of the Rose. Developers have also chosen to make time travel an essential component of the story itself, a rationale for the player being cast back in the first place, as we also saw earlier. Thus, the mystery adventure RPG The Forgotten City is marketed on the premise that players will travel 2,000 years into the past and relive the final days of the cursed Roman city. The game holds in tension the relationship between the represented past and the present day, something that is there in the frame stories for the recent Assassin's Creed installments, but easily forgotten. In The Forgotten City, references to plague in Rome can be met with comments on the COVID-19 pandemic, while Karen memes are discussed on several occasions. In the epilogue, meanwhile, the player finds themselves in a grand museum filled with ancient artifacts from the various cultures encountered in the game, including Rome, Greece, Egypt, and Sumer. Within the museum, the player can talk to those they saved from the cursed city, with the cursed characters reflecting on the differences between ancient and modern understandings of the world. One such character, a Greek philosopher, reveals that he is now working as a consultant for the Faculty of Classics at Cambridge University, helping fill the odd gaps in their knowledge. The inversion of time travel allows for a thought experiment, whereby the makers and users of the artifacts familiar to us from museums are able to speak in the present. The temporal leap element of the time travel metaphor thus functions in a variety of ways in contemporary RPGs, from suggesting an effective encounter with history to a journey through the way the past has come down to us, and even in The Forgotten City at least, imagining bringing the past into dialogue with the present. There are, of course, a number of other platforms and genres that provide their own twist on the time travel metaphor. I want to conclude this section by looking at two further examples. The first is a museum engagement project, Where's My Cloak?, a 2019 point-and-click adventure game created for the Roman Baths at Bath in Bath, UK. Players of this game are encouraged to explore the Roman baths, travel through time, and write your curse tablets to punish the thief. The stylized pixel graphics of this game are a far cry from Assassin's Creed, and yet the enjoinder remains, suggesting that engaging with primary material, in this case the famous Bath curse tablets, is as important a part of the metaphor as graphical fidelity and a sprawling open world might be. Then we have developers themselves making use of the metaphor to frame their output, such as Time Machine Designs, who specialize in, quote, taking the latest historical and archaeological research and using it to reconstruct sites that can be explored in Microsoft Flight Simulator, such as here, their Hadrian Wall 180 project. Here, the metaphor encompasses both the possibilities afforded by Microsoft Flight Simulator's digital twin capabilities, which accurately model the real world, and creative modeling of historical structures based on rigorous research. It is about putting historical structures back into their real environment, which in turn raises and potentially answers questions about how they worked. There is more of the mechanical at work here, the time machine, in the use of the metaphor, both in terms of the production of the experience, but also as a research toolkit. Some of the most enterprising claims for time travel can be found in historical VR experiences. I've argued elsewhere how VR simulations sell themselves on the access they provide to historical space, as well as how the focus remains firmly on the built environment of antiquity, including how technology can effectively reconstruct and make accessible urban landscapes. References to time, though, play a crucial role in evoking what will happen during experience. This is not just about looking at a 3D model on pixelated grass, it is about the pedagogical benefits Meta angled for in their campaign. While historical games may well facilitate learning, here it becomes the central focus. So in Rome Reborn, a VR app created by historians and archaeologists, users are told they will, quote, travel back in time and experience the Roman Forum to learn about over 40 monuments. This is time travel for educational purposes. More, it shows how the metaphor is used to delineate virtual realities from visiting a real site. In terms of the latter, one may learn about certain monuments, typically those left intact or reconstructed to some degree, but especially with Rome, where modern roads cut through the imperial fora, the benefits of time traveling in VR, it is suggested, lie in the ability to put everything back together as it once was, and to do so at scale. This is not just the forum, but the entire ancient city. The Rome Reborn app also has a time warp feature that shows buildings as they once looked, usually at their peak, it shows buildings as they are returning to how they once looked, usually at their peak. Historical fictions have long been understood as a reflection on then and now. The time warp function appears to be the latest, indeed most literal iteration of this mode. The lithodomist VR reconstructions offer an even wider variety of ancient sites. Visitors are encouraged to travel back to 200 BC to sanctuaries such as Epidaurus, or indeed journey back in time to 3rd century AD to Rome's port town of Ostia. This is time travel as historical destinations, not just travel to well-known sites, but to the lesser-known ones too. Lithodomists claim that they want to help visitors experience unseen treasures, as well as ancient places return to their former glory. This is ostensibly achieved thanks to in-house archaeologists who, quote, pierce the veil of time so that we can experience legendary places for ourselves. Here, the unearthing has been done for the viewer. This is partly due to the limited interactivity in many VR simulations, but it is also due to the way they act as research repositories, archiving a range of source material and then interpreting this for the viewer for the purpose of opening up specialist knowledge, usually through a tour mechanic where buildings are explained by experts. As the creator of Rome Reborn, Bernie Fischer, has argued, the idea is to take all the monographs and studies on the individual monuments and weave them together into something that gives us a synthetic view of the whole city. VR as time travel is thus less about leaping into history and more a measured walk accompanied by a guide. What often underpins this idea is preservation. Microsoft's ancient Olympia Common Grounds, a collaboration between Microsoft and the Hellenic Ministry of Culture and Sports, is one such example. Quote, by digitally preserving ancient Olympia, the project aims to create a time capsule. This is VR preserving the past for a distant future, ostensibly as both a reminder and rejoinder to human potential, helping to keep in mind, quote, what we're capable of, end quote. This type of preservation is designed to encourage visitors to think about the common ground, the ways that people are interconnected by our shared history and events. These are laudable aims, although the experience itself remains orientated towards architectural reconstruction and voiceover. The same is true of other VR experiences, such as the VR Time Travel in History bundle on the distribution platform Steam. Individual installments are particularly keen to let you know where and when you will travel through time to. We have the VR time traveling in medieval towns and islands, as well as Roma VR Domus, which continues a long trend of reconstructing Pompeii just before the eruption of Vesuvius. Users are encouraged to, quote, travel back in time to the year 70 AD to the famous house of an ancient Roman banker before it was destroyed by the volcano. These predominantly ascetic VR pieces give the impression of what it might have been like to stand in a certain historical space, albeit one where everyone else is inexplicably down tools and left. With regard to the Virtual Reality Oracle project, our goal was to approximate an oracular ritual in which the visitor actually takes part. In the project's trailer, the use of the time travel metaphor focused on the human aspect of this simulation. Quote, travel back in time to the ancient Greek oracle of Zeus and Dodona, meet the pilgrims and hear their stories, be a part of the ancient ritual, end quote. Such an approach remains underused in VR, likely due to the complexities and costs involved in peopling VR reconstructions with believable characters, whether CGI or human actors. One other such experience where this has been attempted, just play that. One other such experience where this has been attempted is Faber-Korschel's Gladiators in the Colosseum. This uses live action and digital sets to recreate a gladiatorial fight in the Colosseum in ATCE. Time travel is used to frame the experience, with the user teleporting to ancient Rome in order to better understand the cruelty of the games. Faber-Korschel go on to provide an interesting take on the time travel metaphor. In their experience, quote, the spectator is not just a viewer, as in a classical documentary, rather they slip into the body of a gladiator and experience firsthand the struggle for survival. Gladiators in the Colosseum thus foregrounds the metaleptic potential of the time travel metaphor when deployed in VR. Here we have a transgression of the viewer from documentary audience to documentary subject, a movement made possible thanks to the way Faber-Korschel deploys a traditional mode of storytelling, documentary, with its well-established boundaries between extra-diegetic viewer and diegesis, in a highly individualized medium, virtual reality, that helps to place the audience in the scene. This transference phenomena has become something of a marketing strategy for immersive technology companies. Zuber, for example, leads with the following. Our team create authentic immersive experiences that transport your visitors to another time or place. This idea of transference, not just through time, but also other modes of storytelling and ways of visualizing the world, from documentaries and architectural maquettes to personal experiences, is what powers the promised shift in perspective and neatly encapsulates the VR as time travel offer. It is about abruptly finding yourself in a historicized environment and, in the process of onboarding, discovering new ways to interact with this digital archive. This was perhaps nowhere more apparent than in Assassin's Creed Nexus, Ubisoft's first VR installment for the franchise. Nexus takes us full circle, bringing together many of the elements discussed. Indeed, within the opening moments of the game, the protagonist expresses their opinion of the series' Animus's technology, the ability to relive the memories of those long dead, with the phrase, "What is this? Time travel?" The antagonist, Dominica, responds with a dismissive gesture, "It's just a simulation. No action you take in the Animus can directly affect the present." What can be affected, though, is the player, as my own experience demonstrated. While reviews of Nexus mostly focus on the parkour and combat, what struck me was the ability to pick up a simple black figure vase and examine it. While you can see such vases in Assassin's Creed Odyssey and loot or indeed break them, the ability to pick one up in Nexus was, for me, qualitatively different. It aligned with the experience of picking up objects in the University of Bristol's virtual museum, The Uncertain Space. Nexus, though, is not a museum. Rather, it represents a living, breathing world during the time when the 30 tyrants controlled Athens following the Athenian surrender during the Peloponnesian War. In this world, the black figure vase is more than just a prop. It is a manifestation of an everyday object that the player can engage with. It is a piece of primary material, which, as with the Roman Baths game, is itself a key aspect of the time travel metaphor. Nexus therefore suggests new ways in which the time travel metaphor might function, bridging the divide between interactivity in games and the possibility of VR reconstructions. The culmination appears to be a first-person examination of VR's transportive space. So far, we've seen how tech companies, developers, and academic projects have attempted to define the experience of virtual antiquity as a turning back of the clock. Time travel, though, has also been a cornerstone of experimental approaches to historiography for some time. Keith Hopkins, for example, attempted to reintroduce the reader to the multiplicity of belief and experience in the Roman world through empathetic imagination by regaling the adventures of two time travelers on a round trip to Pompeii. Other scholars have used the metaphor to meditate on the very act of writing history. Meg Foster, for example, argued that historians are time travelers. We do more than dip into the past and return to the present. We straddle time. Time travel is thus held to be what historians do. More than this, they are implicated in the wider temporal web of history. They're not simply passive or objective observers, despite the ways in which historiography suggests otherwise. Carle Verleinen has examined this in detail, including whether any such privileged knowledge can be gained if we were in fact able to visit the past. Verleinen's analysis is revealing in that it concludes that direct observational access to the past and the present would permit only very limited ability to fact check. Far from being able to provide insight into the experiential aspects of the past, Verleinen's thought experiment with his time travel machine-like historian Mark II demonstrates that such understanding can only come from the structuring and meaning-making inherent in all historical representations. The result is that far from modeling time travel, historical video games and simulations can be seen to function firmly within traditional modes of historiography, albeit at the more innovative end. As Verleinen argues, when the agent can interact with the world and the world can present questions and demands, a heightened experience is also potentially achievable. This, it is made clear, would not be possible with the historian Mark II due to the requirement for the past to remain ontologically distinct, even if we were able to visit it. and thus not something a visitor could understand experientially or make meaning of outside interpretation. Thus, insofar as any history can make the past present, games and simulations are at the forefront of experiential and experimental historiography, even while this remains a matter of representational form and has nothing to do with the past itself. The key takeaway is that historical games and VR experiences might well offer a unique insight into their subject matter, not because they facilitate time travel, but because they work effectively within modes of historical representation. Such a view is not lost on scholars. Mikhail Machoki has articulated how emotive and personal relationships are forged with material heritage when experienced in conjunction with digital reconstructions. We can see this type of relationship at work in Andy Kelly's article for The Gamer, which compares a real-life visit to the sanctuary of Delphi with his exploration of the site in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Immediately, he writes, "I felt like I'd been there before. Having spent a good amount of time in Odyssey's recreation of Delphi, it was striking how familiar it all seemed." This feeling, he argues, only grew more powerful as I wandered up the slopes, weaved between the ruins, ran my hands over the smooth marble, and ran away from scary-looking Mediterranean bugs flying directly towards my face. The rest of Kelly's article follows the format of Rome Reborn's Time Warp feature to present pictures from his visit to Delphi alongside screenshots from his experience of Assassin's Creed Odyssey. That this mode of temporal differentiation has been co-opted by players suggests how, for some at least, it is possible to sublimate the emotion of visiting an ancient site to its virtual counterpart. Such a mode of reception also foregrounds the familiarity and strangeness of the past, which Lucas Hassis has argued is a fundamental part of time traveling in games, by situating the known alongside the unknown. Kelly's photos in particular draw equivalence and demonstrate how playing the game, in his words, implanted a strong vivid image of what the sanctuary might have looked like in my brain, which filled in the blanks between the ruins. The overall impact? Andy says, "I wasn't seeing the faded remnants of Delphi, I was seeing the place." Assassin's Creed Odyssey took Kelly back to Delphi, only for Kelly to take Assassin's Creed Odyssey to Delphi in order to use both gamified history and real-life heritage to reimagine the past in situ. This is an experience not unlike the one that the Virtual Reality Oracle project team had on a field trip to Dodona in April 2023, when we held up the experience we had created of a visit to the Oracle of Zeus on an iPad at key junctures within the site, noting how familiar we felt with the space. Christian Rollinger puts it another way in his analysis of Assassin's Creed Origins, which he suggests becomes a form of time travel, blurring the differences between history, games, and heritage. Hassis makes a similar argument when he notes that historical games give players an impression of an era that can't be attained in any other way. Time travel in this instance must be thought of as an emotive response to assemblage, in this case of often distinct fields of inquiry and production, which results in a type of imaginative co-presence of the virtual and real antiquity. While for some, time travel can may blur boundaries, for others it can help to clarify. Christian Casey has explored how time travel can bring questions about the nature of the past into sharper focus. While noting that short of a time machine, visiting ancient Egypt is impossible, Casey goes on to outline how some academic debates are about ways of thinking about the past, and that an immersive simulation like Assassin's Creed Origins can inform these debates, but it can allow us to break away from entrenched modes of thinking and view the world of the past as a real place, a big place full of unique people. Time travel here, echoing the Ancient Olympia project, is about empathy and an attempt to understand our shared humanity, which in turn, Casey suggests, will build a deeper, more holistic understanding of ancient lived experience. This reading of the time travel metaphor was certainly a major factor in the design decisions behind the Virtual Reality Oracle, our attempt to capture a sense of the oracular ritual through the experiences and concerns of those who visited Dodona. Virtual realities as time travel, in Adam Chapman's words, are therefore about the ways in which immersive experiences allow the developer, historian, and player to move easily through historical time in order to make meaning, pointing to, exploring, or constructing connections or disconnections between objects, cultures, people, events, or locations of the past, even when separated by many years. We can maximize on this by using simulations to ask questions of the past that only such models can answer. One of the aims of the Virtual Reality Oracle project, for example, was to examine the evidence for how the consultation process may have worked. Such an approach can also be seen at play in scholarship that makes use of digital models, such as Matthew Nichols's digital model of Rome, to ask questions of ancient sight lines or the orientation of the theatres to the sun. Again, this is not about visiting the actual past or even evoking an experience of the past, but about foregrounding mediation and using digital tools as part of the historical process. It is about making history an experiential activity in order to ask different questions. As we've already seen with certain VR experiences, preservation, often in the form of a time capsule, is another way in which a sense of time travel is evoked. Tyne Russell, in an article for the Historical Games Network, pointed out that in an ever-changing world, games made only 2 years ago can already depict spaces that can no longer be accessed in the real world. From warfare to climate change, we're in danger of losing access to important historical sites. Russell goes on to argue that it will not be uncommon for video games to become archival resources that historians and researchers can use to look back at the 21st century past. This is perhaps more controversial with some video games and VR experiences than others. For instance, Aris Politopoulos and others have argued for how the Assassin's Creed series problematically presents its players with two faces, one of a virtual heritage tourist, mouth wide open in wonder at the beauty of the past, the other of a time-traveling murderer. It is precisely this paradox that has inspired the recently launched Playful Time Machines project led by Angus Moll at Leiden University. The project looks at how video games are reshaping our relationship with the past and builds on the ideas of games as time machines in which you can leave the here and now. Of course, it is not just games in VR that are being looked at in this context. For the Time Machine Europe program, XR technologies are just one part of a much larger project framed as an encyclopedic endeavor. This program brings together a consortium of hundreds of projects and partners working to digitize European cultural heritage across time, with the ambition to build a European time machine. This time machine, it is suggested, would not just store vast amounts of data, but use this information to form simulation hypotheses that are navigable and accessible to a wide demographic. Here, time travel is aligned with big data, with the assumption being that with enough information, it will be possible to map the evolution of cultures and social systems and create a comprehensive, supposedly living resource that has as much relevance for the past as for the present as for the understanding of the past. Let us finally look at how players describe their experience of time travel. I'll focus here on visitor responses that we received for the Virtual Reality Oracle, as well as player reviews for Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Between 2022 and 2023, the Virtual Reality Oracle project team exhibited the VRO at 8 public engagement events and gathered over 350 pieces of anecdotal feedback. We asked visitors to let us know whether they liked the experience, whether it changed how they thought about the ancient world, and if so, how it achieved this. Around 80% of visitors said it changed how they thought about the ancient world, and I focus here on those who qualify this with reference to time travel. Those who mentioned time travel directly discussed their experience in strikingly similar ways. The overwhelming sense was that they experienced the site and its inhabitants as observers, not of how things actually were, but how they may have worked, how ancient visitors may have felt. For instance, one visitor said they really enjoyed being transported back in time. And hearing the stories of how ancients may have thought and believed. While another said that it was pretty interesting observing the environment of ancient Greece, felt like I'd traveled back in time. Another visitor also framed their experience in terms of how it made them feel. It gave me the chance to travel through time, and I felt I was living there and then. We can see at work here both Machoki's emotional resonance with virtual spaces and heritage sites, Casey's sense of antiquity as a real place, Hopkins' empathetic imagination, and also engagement with what Zimmerman calls atmospheres of the past, which he argues can lead to feelings of authenticity that influence how audiences think and feel about the depicted time and what they will expect from other depictions in the future. Interestingly, one visitor went on to note that as an ancient historian familiar with the particulars of the VR story, I could contextualize what I already knew within a real framework. It was a way to experience and visualize knowledge usually taken from book sources and other information. This speaks to the way in which virtual worlds not only pull together multiple, often conflicting accounts in order to portray something coherent, but also how they support Philanen's analysis of games and simulations, not by returning the user to the past, but by enabling representations to be compared. Our time-traveling ancient historian concluded by noting that it was fantastic to leave the chaos of London for a while and to be in touch with the solace of the Mediterranean landscape, trees and stars, and the infinite sky. Excellent music too, he said. Here we return to the temporal leap element of the time travel metaphor. For this visitor, the experience was more than just a cognitive reassessment of existing historical material, but rather an embodied transportation from what was a freezing day in January 2023 to the mid-5th century BCE June setting of the Virtual Reality Oracle, brought about through sight, sound, the depiction of nature, and atmosphere. In Gabriella Zevin's best-selling novel, Tomorrow, Tomorrow, and Tomorrow, a meditation on the role of games in culture more broadly, there is a line that resonates with the theme of this paper. When the main character Sam sees his future business partner Sadie for the first time in years, he thinks to himself, this is what time travel is. It's looking at a person and seeing them in the present and the past concurrently, and that mode of transport only worked with those one has known a significant time. I'd like to suggest a rephrase. Time travel in virtual antiquity is looking at the varied reconstructions of ancient civilizations, seeing their cultures, people, and urban spaces in the present, and projecting these onto the remains of the past concurrently. As with the time warp trend, this pairing subsequently informs how one imagines how the past might have been. And that mode of transport works particularly well with cultures one is familiar with, whether through study or representation. Hence, the virtual reality oracle helped our time-traveling historian to harmonize existing knowledge with the VR simulation, while for another visitor, the VR experience gave them a different perspective from actually visiting the site in real life. It helped them think about what it would have sounded like. While visitors to the virtual reality oracle express their experiences differently, it is this sense of time travel that seems to enable an acknowledgement of difference between then and now. In other words, an understanding of how oracles may have worked, as well as appreciation of potential continuities, which another visitor picked up on, noting, "We have similar wishes, dreams, thoughts, yearnings, wants, despite all the years that have passed by." Player reviews of Assassin's Creed Odyssey also pick up on the theme of time travel. At the time of writing, around 30 reviews from the 46,480 English language reviews for the game specifically reference an experience of time travel or how the game acts as a time machine. There's pretty much universal agreement that part of what enables this sense of time travel is the unbelievable detail that has gone into the game. But there's also a clear sense that the world of Assassin's Creed Odyssey is not ancient Greece. Players point out inaccuracies, acknowledge the fictional and mythical elements of the game, and agree that the so-called experience of time travel is an approximation, what things may have been like. So why references to time travel at all? Why do companies go to the effort to frame these experiences as time travel? And why do audiences continue to discuss their experience in these terms? It seems that what the level of detail in Assassin's Creed Odyssey provides is, in the words of one reviewer, the closest thing to a true living, breathing world. Another reviewer noted that the game is the closest thing to a time machine that lets you experience ancient Greece. Just as the game selectively approximates antiquity, these reviews show how the experience of time travel is also a subjective, contingent, and approximate one. It is close to the real thing, sometimes very close. One reviewer said, "I fell in love with how the game visualizes ancient Greece," while another pointed out that this was a real Odyssey. Comparisons abound in such reviews. For one player, the game makes me feel like I'm there talking with Socrates and friends. You can really just hang out in the ancient cities and see the sights, which is better than the real thing, brackets, ruins, in some ways. Others explored similar themes to Hopkins' experiential historiography. It was also clever how some of the statues were painted in their original historic colors. The cities have so many NPCs living out their daily lives. The detail of items on shrines and such always draws my attention. It is this experience that keeps at least some players coming back for more. As Christina Raymond Schneider puts it in the relation to Assassin's Creed Mirage, the storyline is admittedly secondary to the excitement of immersing yourself in another era and drifting through a bustling, and opulent city from the comfort of your own home. So, to conclude, the metaphor of time travel continues to sustain an important connection between users and producers of virtual histories, helping to shape their relationship with history and indeed their sense of the past. We have seen how the metaphor works in historical games and VR experiences, from temporal command and strategy games to effective encounters in RPGs. It acts as a comparative framework, a metonym for research, and encapsulates creative responses to the historical record. It is flexible enough to sustain both the temporal leap that players make and the data storage capabilities of a time capsule. It blurs the distinctions between modes of history as much as it clarifies. It can be read as a toolkit for doing history, and it has fostered cultural trends whereby users and producers alike compare and contrast what they see in simulations with what can be seen of the past today. It is transportive, not so much across time as across modes of historical production, with immersive technologies offering the latest possibilities in terms of one-to-one engagement with an ever-growing amalgam of historical information and at times reimagined historical characters. What it is manifestly not is time travel. As Philanen reminds us, the very strength of virtual realities as time travel lies in their representational affordances, in the tension and flexibilities within the metaphor. Let us conclude by returning to Meta's advertising campaign. Jeremy Huggett has argued that we need more than just models to build a working virtual heritage metaverse. We need to draw on what works in games. We need user-generated content, interactive simulations, and adaptable worlds. There are signs that this is happening, as we're hearing about today. And there are other examples, such as Maurizio Forte's recent experiments using AI and VR to reimagine ancient landscapes as part of the Rethinking the Past project. Indeed, it seems we may be closer to achieving the vision Meta unveiled in 2022 than ever before, not through corporate success, but rather a long-standing distributed inquiry into the possibilities afforded by virtual realities as time travel. So, perhaps Meta was not so far off the mark. Time traveling in virtual antiquity may be an illusion, but the impact is already real. Thank you.
Thank you. That was very interesting for me, at least. I'm an avid fan of the times of antiquity in the Mediterranean and in Europe both, and in large part due to having played Rome Total War when I was a child. So because of that, I've ever since then read up on different cultures that you can play there, and my interest in history overall has just boomed from there. So very interesting indeed. Now, starting off with the first question. How, in quotes, dangerous is it for the history to be distorted, and can we be sure that the right research has been done for the creation of games like the ones presented?
So it's a very good question. I mean, it's the core question we're always asking when we're experiencing these things. I tend to stay clear of the accuracy question because I actually think there are more interesting questions to ask when we play these sorts of games because they are historical representations, and no historical representation is ever truly accurate. Whether it's traditional writing of history, it's all representation. Obviously, that works up to a point. I mean, when we were building the virtual reality oracle, we had to make guesswork. We had to make approximations. We had to synthesize and choose and select material, but we were very open about that. So that's the difference, I think, between academic-led projects and very critical commercial projects, and then kind of mass market projects. Is that it's how honest you are about the fact that this is a simulation, that huge amounts of interpretation have gone into it, and that people will interpret it further themselves. It's that sort of question, I think, of how upfront are you? There will always be inaccuracies, there will always be misleading elements, but yeah, it's how honest you are.
Yeah. Okay, on to the next question. How do you envision VR time travel evolving in the next decade? What advancements in technology or narrative design might enhance these experiences further?
Fantastic question. So at the University of Bristol, we have something a little bit similar to the HCI-VR labs, sort of walled cave. I think we're going to move outside of just headset experiences and into kind of more spatial experiences. That's a spatial computing angle. And I think that's really interesting because it takes us away from that sort of intensely personal experience into a more kind of shared experience. So I think that will be one element. So at Bristol, we've got this kind of 360-degree wall of screens. It's called the reality emulator. And you can quite literally have a whole bunch of people standing inside it, moving around a sort of virtual world. That's really exciting, but it's basically literally just been built this year, and there are very few experiences for it. So I think seeing what we were saying this morning with the HCI lab, there are going to be new ways of moving in these spaces, of building experiences for these spaces. But I really do want to see more narrative-orientated, character-driven experiences, because it comes back to that emotional point that Angela was mentioning as well. We need to stop seeing these just endless dead houses, these endless dead buildings that sort of are meaningless, because that's not how spaces were ever experienced. But of course, it takes a huge amount of creative, intellectual, human-driven, and technical expertise to put together, something like Assassin's Creed Nexus, which is the closest I've seen to a kind of living, breathing VR world. But it's still a game. It still has its flaws. It's still quite clunky at times. So I think as the technology evolves, our storytelling needs to evolve with it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, I'll say the next one. Honestly, as a creator is nice, but where do we get the critical view on how cultural heritage is a claim for power for the future? For how the, in quotes, the fall of Rome, end of quotes, is used for all alt-right radicalization? More high polished images of the Forum or Colosseum are not helping?
It's a really good question. I'm also very conscious of the way in which games, images of Rome, images of Sparta are co-opted by the far right and are used to sort of further particular political narratives and ideas. I think, again, it's on us to own that narrative, to understand that these were diverse, interesting worlds that don't fit that narrative. And again, this is not just true of games and VR experiences. It's true of film as well. Film scholars have had to push back against reinterpretations of or uses of the Gladiator and films like that by the far right as well. It's about always pushing back on that kind of use case, and demonstrating that. I think it's about demonstrating through discourse, but it's also about demonstrating through building. I think as scholars we tend to not always champion the engineering work that we do in the same way the sciences do. We study, we research, we engage in discourse, but we also build. And this is what I learned as being part of the VR Oracle project. We can put the diversity of ancient Greece back on display, and we can make that critical and upfront and demonstrate how we have imagined that, so that people don't just think that we're using contemporary progressive ideas and putting them back onto the past. We can say, no, look, we know that people from all over the Mediterranean traveled here because we have dedications from Siwa in Egypt. We actually have that, so we can put travelers who came from there into the experience because that is the evidence that we have. So I think it's about owning the narrative in lots of different ways.
All right. The next one is about. I was wondering if you think the future of immersive historical experiences exists in more systems-based advancement or conversely more scripted experiences.
That's a very good question. As an arts and humanities scholar and someone who's dabbled in creative writing myself, I definitely like to think it's more about the storytelling. And I'm working at the moment with sort of groups of early career creatives experimenting with XR technology, because I think we've only just started to tap what is possible here. Basically, what I think we should be doing is not just taking existing modes of storytelling and trying them in VR, because in a way, that's why we just get lots of digital models and some sort of slightly awkward games. I think what we need is to sort of think, what can we use this medium for? But that also then goes back to the question, we also need to understand where these technical developments are taking us. Motion sickness is still a problem in VR, and there are other kind of technical limitations in the technology. How far? I mean, you can see it with Nexus. It's completely basic compared to Odyssey, because it's an old. These systems can't resolve games in the same way that complex computers can. But that will change. I also think there's a space for AR storytelling in situ, in ruined spaces, that goes beyond just phones, because I think that will then sort of take us away from this sort of ruins in one place, virtual experience in another, museum in another again, and sort of this separated out. Can we sort of find a way of bringing these experiences in situ? Because that's clearly what is working for people in a distributed way. So it'd be interesting to see if we can make that work in the real world. But again, there are technical problems. I've spoken to AR companies where it's great to have a phone and the Acropolis and to try and imagine what it looked like, but the sun on the screen means you can't see the screen. So there are sort of basic technical limitations one has to overcome to make this work.
Yeah, definitely. Last question that we have. Do immersive VR experiences encourage audiences to think critically about the past, or are they more likely to accept the experiences as, in quotes, authentic, end of quotes, without question?
Brilliant question. Fantastic one to end on. I can answer it specifically in relation to the Virtual Reality Oracle project, because we did a long, sort of robust school study. So we took it into schools where we used it as a teaching tool on a topic where Dodona is taught on the UK classical civilization syllabus. So we were really actually interested primarily. The whole point of the project is, can this be used as a teaching tool? And if so, how? How do students respond to it? By and large, students don't accept it as verbatim. They understand that it's an approximation. I think the fact that we went with kind of quite obviously sort of slightly pixelated, very colorful graphics, we moved away from photorealism, helped there. But we also broke it down into very short segments that could be kind of dipped in and out of. And we built a whole website with sort of teaching resources for teachers around it. And then we saw how teachers actually used it in the classroom. And what we found was actually it provoked questions. It wasn't just, oh, here's Dodona, this is exactly what it was like. It provoked questions in class, but it also helped them remember factual details and elements of the site, of the syllabus, much longer than those who didn't use it. So we did a study where students were taught with the Oracle, VR Oracle, and the ones that weren't. And so there was a measurable difference in how they remembered things, not specifically from the experience, but the experience itself helps them to remember. And it shouldn't be surprising. That's exactly how we learn experientially. We learn much better that way than in other ways. So it's about giving that added learning benefit, provoking questions, and being upfront. Again, coming back to that earlier question about the choices, the design choices that have gone into this.
Yeah, and again, thank you for that incredible presentation. And with that said, we'll be moving on for our lunch break. We'll be back at 1 p.m. In the meanwhile, people who are here in person can take some coffee and some cake. And everyone else, we'll see you later at 1 p.m. Thank you. Is Eirini from Greek Ministry of Education, Religious Affairs and Sports with the presentation, A Collaborative Narrative-Based Game as a Tool to Communicate Cultural Content. Eirini, you may start.
Hello, and I thank you very much for the invitation. I will present a collaborative narrative-based game as a tool to communicate cultural content, and it will be a point of view of an educator and an archaeologist who wants to communicate cultural content using just simple tools as a board game and an interactive fiction game. So there is an increasing tendency for integrating game-based approaches with learning in the last decades in education, and we see many terms that are not synonyms, but they are similar, like edutainment, like playful learning, gamification, game-based learning, and serious games. And we have seen so many approaches in the specific domain of cultural heritage, trying to communicate tangible but also intangible aspects of cultural heritage. And such approaches intend to preserve, reproduce, allow the appreciation of cultural content, as we have seen. The author tried to understand how such approaches are used in games that have a content related to cultural sites in order to design her own game. So 34 games with a dominant tangible dimension, a spatial dimension, were examined, and 5 research questions were formulated. In which ways do games for cultural sites handle cultural content? Which kinds of interactions with cultural content do these games enable? In which contexts are they used? Do they enable social interaction? Which outcomes are reported for these games? Of course, this literature review is not exhaustive, and there are so many games that are not including. But we can make some observations from these 34 games reviewed. It was found that an overall view of a cultural site is achieved through exploration, and an adventure game design was selected many times for a greater challenge. All these games are just educational games, and they are not commercial games. Treasure hunts were more often, but there were also games that enhanced the creation of complex projects by the players. Less frequently, adventure games were used as narrative experiences in a cultural site, while there were few games emphasizing procedural knowledge acquisition, and they have chosen a role-playing or a simulation game design for this scope. Usually, the game's progress is dependent on the completion of learning tasks, and a simple narrative is frequently used, but as a backstory. Complex storytelling in educational games was found to be less frequent, and it was found mostly in location-based games that are implemented in mobile devices. Regarding context of use, the majority of the games reviewed were games for cultural tourism, and they were implemented in mobile devices. Less were suitable for a school classroom or for training professionals. Mostly games for cultural tourism had a multiplayer design, while games for classroom mostly have a single-player design. Regarding the reported outcomes from these games, learning outcomes were the mostly reported, followed by social, enjoyment, engagement outcomes. The potential of games to change attitude towards cultural heritage was less examined. Specific issues, as the potential of games to correct misconceptions, to socialize lonely individuals, or to engage indifferent and weak students, were not examined. There were limited studies evaluating the effectiveness of a game-based approach relatively to a traditional teaching method, and evaluations studying the impact of the setting or the coordinator on the game outcomes were not found in this review. So there were some conclusions taken into consideration. For example, that the complex storytelling can be further exploited and evaluated. Also, the influence of the context of use of games for cultural heritage needs further investigation, same as the effects of games in players' attitude towards cultural heritage, and the use of games for cultural heritage in formal education. So the game Tracers of the Past was designed, which is suitable for formal educational settings, but also non-formal and informal educational settings. It combines complex narrative, endogenous cooperation and competition, and the term endogenous is used because the player's tasks are interdependent and simultaneous. The game design is close to the integrated framework of playful learning because it pursues the mental processing of the learning material together with affective engagement and social interaction. So the game uses narrative, and according to Brunner, narrative is a sequence of events recounted, organized around intentional states and somehow violating canonical scripts. Narrative is a mental instrument supporting the representation but also the construction of reality, according to Brunner. It is considered as an appropriate approach for teaching science because it enhances scientific concepts comprehension and long-term retention. It makes the lecture more enjoyable. It plays an important role in discovery learning and supports engagement. Within the context of narrative, fiction is used at times for learning purposes because fantasy contributes to intrinsic motivation and learning outcomes. In the specific domain of history education, historical novels facilitate a look into events through the perspective of characters often ignored by history textbooks. So narrative combined with learning lead to narrative-centered learning environments that engage, strengthen problem-solving skills, but also they have the risk to increase cognitive load, reducing thus learning gains. So there is the need for further research on their effectiveness. Such narrative-centered learning environments are found in subject areas such as geography, ecology, etc., but also in a few games for cultural heritage where these games were mostly location-based. So the game uses narrative and fiction, but it follows realism in respect that it depicts persons, events that could have actually existed. A continuous narrative experience is given because every player's action is tightly bound to the storyline. Therefore, the narrative is not used as a backstory which simply justifies the presented learning tasks. The game also uses cooperation and competition, as it was mentioned before, to motivate, to enhance learning gains and engagement. This collaborative learning is considered to be not to be fully exploited in games and mostly in adventure games. And although the amalgamation of collaboration and competition is advocated for learning purposes, it has yet to be sufficiently exploited. So, the combination of endogenous cooperation and competition are used in order to create motivating and engaging social interactions. Skills of communication and argumentation are practiced, and it is pursued to enhance the deeper processing of the learning material through discussions about the content of the narratives. The players are expected to discuss the narratives. Scientific information is incorporated in fictional narratives. There is one narrative structure that can host many different narratives, and these narratives follow the detective's genre in respect that a problem is posed at the beginning, and the player gradually discovers the solution by interpreting clues. In such manner, the designer controls the story and the player has a certain sense of control because she controls the investigative level of the narrative only. So we can see here the narrative structure. A criminal offense is presented and 10 suspects are also presented, and the players have to discover the 3 really guilty persons by investigating a cultural place, getting intangible clues, searching monuments for evidence, experiencing moments of life in the past, and when they are ready, they can bring in an indictment against the suspect, and the other players can bet pro or against this choice. Learning within the game design was followed because learning is tightly intertwined with gameplay. So we can see here, for example, a basic action of the game, the action of searching the monuments. It has the gaming goal to give the players the opportunity to collect evidence that will help the solution of a mystery. At the same time, this action has the learning goal to help familiarize with a cultural place, its intangible and tangible aspects. Another action is the action of collecting clues. it has the gaming goal to help the solution of the mystery, but at the same time, it gives information about intangible cultural information and also about historical information. And there are also everyday life actions. This is a gaming opportunity to improve score, to increase competition, but at the other hand, it gives players the learning goal to experience life in the past. A first implementation of this design was as a board game, because board games are ideal for collaborative learning. The board took the form of a map due to the spatial character of the game. Different maps can be used as boards depending on the narrative and the archaeological background, but as a first implementation, the map of the Athenian Acropolis was used, and the first narratives concerned the 4th century BC Athenian topography and history. So players explore the cultural site by moving their pawns on the board with the help of a die. They follow depicted routes corresponding to real paths on the Acropolis. Here is the board and the cards used. Here is an instance of a search card. For example, players investigate inside the Vravronion of the Acropolis and investigating among dedications to Artemis that are scientifically documented, they find a garment of a suspect, and in such manner they will maybe they will accuse the suspect. Another example, a clue card. In this clue card, the players follow a suspect, a sculptor, the sculptor Aristocles, and at the same time they learn about the method of the lost walks for casting a bronze statue in the antiquity. And here is a paradigm of an action card. The playing team loses one round to take a nap because the team had stopped in the tavern located next to the agora, but in such manner, players learn about this tavern, which has been excavated. During the game, players write down the collected clues, and the score is registered by the facilitator. This board game version was evaluated in respect to its playability, learning gains, enjoyment, engagement, and social outcomes. There were exploratory evaluations and main evaluations. In main evaluation, a mixed research methodology was followed. Observations, semi-structured group interviews, but also a post-game questionnaire were used. For qualitative methods, and specifically in semi-structured group interviews, the questions used were tightly connected to the game actions because of not disrupting the game flow. And a deductive process was followed for the collection of data because observation and interview mostly focused on predefined themes registered in an observation guide. So the first interventions were conducted at a public library in a small town in Greece. We can see that the data concerning playability and more specifically the axis of functionality, usability, and gameplay were collected. Also, data concerning the cognitive and affective appraisal of the game experience were gathered. Spontaneous comments were gathered, same as written comments like this. Regarding learning outcomes, data concerning declarative knowledge or motivation towards the game and its learning content were gathered, and data concerning strategic knowledge. Here we can see some questions, some players' questions during the game. It was very interesting in these interventions that after the interventions, the players took the initiative to create their own playful narrative about an archaeological site of their area. Regarding engagement, we can see here data regarding behavioral, emotional, cognitive engagement. Collaboration and competition, for example, did they communicate? How about argumentation, team meetings? Were they interested in winning the game? And main evaluation followed with teenage students as part of a history course, but also adults in informal and non-formal settings, and some quantitative data regarding playability, mostly usability, the confusion from the rules, the difficulty of the game duration perception. These were low enough. And there was also a knowledge self-assessment statement. Here we can see moderate to high levels of knowledge self-assessment. And players reported elements they have learned during the game, for example, about monuments and habits, or metal treasures kept in the Chalcothiki of the Acropolis, etc. And there was also a short knowledge test. And in these cases, the scores were statistically higher for adults. Some quantitative data regarding motivation to visit the archaeological site presented, to play another story for the same cultural site, or to play another story for another cultural site. And also the clues and evidence collected were registered. Here is a student's comment. You learn a lot. You want to visit the archaeological site to see the monuments presented in the game. Some enjoyment outcomes. And some comments regarding enjoyment. And during the games, the players filled in worksheets, and these worksheets were collected, and they gave very interesting, they shed light on engagement, and mostly behavioral and cognitive engagement, because it showed the effort to collect all the available data. And some data regarding social interaction. For example, it was interesting that the players made an effort to impede their rivals and bluff, and this was taken as a sign of high competition. The next step was to create an interactive fiction version of the game using the same design. This could make easier the creation of different narratives, it said, the editing of the narratives. This could offer multimodality and easier access to the game, and automatization of the rules for easier use in a classroom setting. So features of classroom multiplayer presential games were used, and these games facilitate collaboration, group work, discussion. The teacher remains the coordinator of the activity, and they offer a shared experience for all through a screen projection of the game environment. And a free authoring tool, Twine, was used. we see here that the story data are organized in interconnected narrative segments entwined, and they are called passages. So here is how the narrative structure of the specific game looks in the Twine editor. It is very much visualized. And here are some instances of the game. They are translated from Greek, some initial procedures of the game. And the three basic actions described before, they are the same here, but in this version of the game, a randomization mechanism determines which of the basic actions will follow. So here we can see that when the randomization mechanism determines search a monument, the playing team selects from the map of an archaeological site a monument to explore. Here is an example. Players search inside the Parthenon and they learn about the golden and ivory statue of goddess Athena and collect at the same time evidence about the mystery. Here, an example of clues collection action. Players learn about the Phoebic oath in ancient Athens and at the same time collect clues about the political beliefs of a person of the story. And here, in an everyday life action, they learn about the shoemaker in the Athenian agora. And the system helps the hypothesis formulation. Opponents can express their opinion. They can bet pro or against the choice of the playing team. And the system reveals the guilt or innocence of the accused person. Rewards and penalties are given. So even this version was evaluated for regarding playability, learning, enjoyment, engagement, social outcomes, in exploratory interventions with students, but also with students with adult students in e-learning. So we can see some results. In one of the sessions, it has to be noted that there was a noisy overexcitement, and this delayed the game. It was interesting, though, that the game triggered the discussion about the Acropolis in the next lesson with the students. Some comments regarding that shed light on enjoyment. But of course, there are students that don't like the approach. One student confessed that she did not like the game. It is interesting that the students kept working during the school break. And main evaluation continued with teenagers and adults. The games were completed as well, and the adults like the randomization mechanism. Some quantitative data regarding the confusion from the rules, difficulty, the game, the duration, the perception of game duration, the knowledge self-assessment statement, and some elements players believe they learned during the game. Sufficient scores for adults and teenagers in the brief knowledge test. The collected clues and evidence during the game. Some data regarding motivation to visit the archaeological site, to play another story for the same site or another site. And some comments an adult stated that as a person who is not enthusiastic about history and has difficulty focusing on information of this sort, it captivated me and triggered my interest in this period. But of course, a teenager can see the game as a way to avoid the classical lesson of ancient Greek. And some enjoyment outcomes. There was a positive stance for most players, but the perception of the game as entertaining was significantly higher in adults. Some comments about enjoyment. A teenager wanted more suspense with a murder, because this would add vividness and drama to the story. And worksheets filled in during the games. Some data regarding social interaction. It was interesting regarding the collaborative work that the team members pronounced together the selected monuments, and the decisions were taken after consent among team members. A teenager, though, suggested higher inter-teams interaction. So we have seen that many different interventions were conducted with different groups in diverse settings, and this does not allow to generalize, of course, the findings, but it is of interest to attempt a cross-case analysis, because there emerge several common patterns. For example, regarding playability and functionality, we have seen that all the game sessions were completed and the predicted stages and procedures were followed. There was minimal to slight confusion by the rules and slight to moderate difficulty of the game. The game duration was long, because it was 1 hour and a half or even 2 hours, but it was perceived as slightly to moderately long, and there was no fatigue resulting in quitting the game. On the other hand, fatigue after playing a story-driven location-based game for more than an hour has been reported. One could think that a narrative-based game could be more easily experienced in a static way. Regarding gameplay, there was enthusiasm for successes. Even teams with low scores insisted on finding the solution. Many times they have said that it is more important to solve the mystery than win the game. So the continuous repetition of monuments, names, and concepts can be taken as a sign of familiarization with the cultural content. Participants formulated hypotheses through abductive reasoning and not by chance. Participants declared they obtained knowledge relative to monuments, customs, and historical facts. And the mean values for knowledge self-assessment were between moderate and high. There was a higher knowledge self-assessment by adults, and this aligns with Igelfeld and Nielsen, who stated that teenagers studying history doubted the potential of learning from computer games, and the adults did better in the knowledge tests. There were some problems with the distinction of scientific and fictional elements. There were some problems in one intervention, and similar problems were reported by Prince et al. After a narrative-based intervention about natural selection. So there is a need for further clarifications about the fictional or scientific character of narrative elements. Regarding motivation, we have seen that players pursue to obtain as many clues and evidence possible before formulating hypotheses. Therefore, the narrative content and the goal of solving a mystery motivated players towards the scientific content. This observation is compatible with Hadjigeorgiou, who said that anticipation created through storytelling makes students look forward to the revelation of the next plot event and the ultimate resolution of the mystery. And Jackson et al. Have found that narrative games achieved motivation at a very high level. What is very encouraging, the player's willingness to discuss about the cultural content of the game. Therefore, an educator can expand the learning content of the game during a debriefing phase. And it was encouraging that some players took the initiative to create their own narrative about an archaeological site, and thus they got engaged in creative play. Regarding the participants' willingness to visit the archaeological site presented, the mean values were between moderate and high. And similarly, the players' interest to play a different story for the same archaeological site have similar values, and their eagerness to play another story for a different archaeological site were close, but adults' motivation to play another story was considerably influenced by the different content. This aligns with Wheaton, who stated that adults have a positive attitude towards game-based learning only when they have indications that this approach is effective on learning. There were positive comments regarding enjoyment and willingness to complete the games. Playful comments were heard, exclamations, and there were intense facial expressions. Apathy or aversion were registered, but these were exceptions. For the general appraisal of the game, the mean values were between moderate to very high. The adults' attitude towards the game was more positive. And the adults found both versions significantly more entertaining than teenagers. And they both liked the narrative used. Regarding engagement and behavioral engagement, participants were concentrated. There were discussions relative to the game and scarce signs of boredom or distraction. There was detailed note-taking, a frequent request for data repetition, a response to the game procedures. There were facial expressions and exclamations of surprise, disappointment, and joy. Players made an effort to solve the mystery. They used abductive reasoning in all the cases, and they got engaged with a game that had a long duration. Such results are compatible with other researchers highlighting that the narrative in a game promotes attention, interest, engagement at very high levels. And regarding social interaction, there was team working and collaboration. There were some passive participants as an exception. There were constant discussions about the game and requests for team meetings, and also competition because players wanted to surpass their rivals and frequently checked on the scores, but there were no aggressive behaviors. There were humorous remarks, and sometimes there was even inter-teams encouragement or cooperation because they wanted to solve the mystery, and this was a shared experience for all. So we have seen that repeated behaviors and results were observed among diverse groups using two different versions of the same game. Of course, there is the need of extensive evaluation with different narratives and coordinators in order to extract more valid conclusions. and it would be of interest to test the potential of this design to facilitate creative play and participatory design. For example, players could work in teams and could use cultural content to create their own narratives based on the given narrative structure. And in such manner, they could get engaged in the active construction of knowledge regarding cultural heritage. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. For the in-depth look into the narrative-based game, I would like to ask, was the Twine game made in 2017?
If Twine game was made?
Yeah, if the Tracers of the Past game was made in 2017, or...
It was made in Twine 1.4. It is a previous version.
Yeah, because I was wondering about the engine. It looks quite different from what I've been using now.
Yes, I haven't used the latest version of Twine, but 1.4 was very useful for an educator without many knowledge regarding programming. But there is also the potential to incorporate more complex elements if you want. I as an educator, I found it very interesting and helpful.
Yeah, it's definitely very useful to get your ideas across and whatnot. But yeah, we do have some questions. I'll start with this one. There seem to be a few significant differences in the data produced from the sessions with teenagers and adults. Which game elements resonated with each age group? In the future, if you wanted to target one particular age group, which elements might you emphasize to have increased engagement?
There were adults seemed to like more the game, and maybe they were less severe, or maybe the teenagers were much more influenced by their gaming preferences. And maybe a simple game, an interactive fiction game, was too simple in relation to Assassin's Creed or all these spectacular games. So adults were more positive. It would be very interesting to work with adults, and also it would be very interesting to work with adults that are older adults. And in one case, they were participants. The participants were above 50 years old, above 60 years old. And in a previous presentation, also this potential was mentioned. It would be very interesting for me to work with older adults, even if my working experience is mostly with teenagers. But it is interesting to work with older persons too. And could you, you have asked me which elements I could use to enhance engagement.
Yeah.
I think the narrative has to be strong because in one case, the participants said that there should be a murder. I think narrative elements very much contribute to engagement. So these narratives have to be very strong. But also there is the group dynamic that engages. Because this game has a very strong social dimension, and so I try to emphasize this social dimension.
All right. Well, yeah, I was the moment I heard about murder, I was also thinking about if there could be any other alternatives to less aggressive way of telling a story. Yeah.
I didn't want to incorporate such elements, of course, in an educational game. Mostly teenagers are influenced by CSI or the films they see. But of course, there are other ways. There are many fascinating details in archaeology that are not that are hidden sometimes from the audience. And when you read all these publications, the archaeological publications, or when you are engaged with archaeological research, you want to make this obvious to the audience. So, for example, when the players listened about the curses written on lead tablets, and this is a scientifically documented element, this provokes engagement. So if the narrative has such elements, I think engagement is enhanced.
Yeah, definitely. I do think we have time for one more question. So it seems that confusion between the fictional and scientific elements were only observed in the digital version and not the board game version. Do you think this was at all connected to the medium? Do you have any thoughts on what design choices might delineate the difference between fictional and scientific elements more clearly?
As I have said before, I cannot generalize. I have findings that are very limited. So maybe it was just the case that the certain class were overexcited and they didn't understand very well. So maybe it's not the medium itself. Of course, it needs, as I have said before, clarifications must be made, and a teacher has to have time to discuss about the narratives, about the elements, to listen to the students and solve all their questions. And also, in the game, as it was shown, there are scientific notes to help to show what is the scientific element. It is explained to the students that the suspects are fictional persons, but they could have existed. Of course, a teacher, an educator must be very attentive when using this game. But every time you want to use the past to make a story or to interpret the past, it is challenging.
Yeah, I do agree. But again, Eirini, thank you very much for this presentation. And now we're moving on to our final... thank you. We're now moving on to our final speaker, Faez Dabestani. He's a game design teacher, content creator from Iran. He will talk about an ancient game restoration project. Faez Dabestani, the floor is yours.
Hi there, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Is my audio good? Everything good?
Yeah, it's good.
Thank you so much. All righty, then I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation. Thank you for joining me on this little research project that I kind of embarked on. And it ended up in some very exciting places. I'm excited to tell you all about my little project, but a very brief introduction of myself. As was mentioned, my name is Faez Dabestani. I'm an Iranian-American game designer. I graduated, I presume I'm going to be a bit younger than most of the participants today, but I graduated George Mason University. I graduated for my bachelor's degree in 2015 and for my master's degree in 2018. And currently I am a freelance game designer, game design teacher, and a content creator residing presently in Iran. So all of that actually kind of matters because what I'm about to reflect for you is a bit of a journey that I was set upon while I was still in university. And basically, this is where it began. Back in 2012, I was in a class called The Culture and Theory of Games. And we started that class by talking about the history of games in general. And one of the games that was brought up as one of the earliest examples of games ever found was this little gem, which is called the Royal Game of Ur. Called as such because it was found in a royal cemetery in a city in ancient Sumeria, present-day Iraq, called Ur. And it is estimated that it is from approximately 4,500 years ago, that is to say 2,400 BC. Now, at the time in the class, our professor told us, according to his resources, that this game is kind of forgotten. No one knows how it used to be played. And so it was fascinating to me. And, looking at it, what could it possibly be? But it turns out a little while later, as I mentioned, since I'm a content creator, at one point I thought about this game and I thought, maybe I should look into it and maybe I should make a little 2-minute video about, hey, check it out. Ancient societies used to have board games and I don't know, we don't know how it was played, but, it's interesting. So I looked into it some more and turns out, yeah, actually, we do know how it was played. So meet Dr. Irving Finkel. He is an English philologist and Assyriologist, which is to say he studies languages and he studies ancient Assyria. He, I think, was also a former curator of the British Museum and a natural-born Santa Claus, as it appears. Now, this distinguished gentleman in the 80s and 90s, if I'm not mistaken, actually translated a cuneiform clay tablet that brought back the rules of the ancient game of Ur, the Royal Game of Ur, and has a lot of resources about it. He is a bit of a legend, and his work is very exemplary. Very briefly, I'm going to go over the actual rules of the game for you here. The way it was played was with dice, and it's basically a race game. What does that mean? It means that each side playing the game would have to get all of their pieces through the board all the way in the same direction as is marked on the board, So from the big side, up into the big side, all the way down the spine, and out the little corners at the end. Whoever got their pieces all the way through the board first, all 7 of their pieces would win. Now, it is important to mention that the tablet that had these rules written on it apparently was written by approximately was written in, I'm going to go back real quick, in 177 BC, which means this game was actually in circulation and was played for, like, I don't know, 2,000 years prior to when they actually found the rules for it, which is to say the rules that we have is very likely a version of what ended up, making it to this tablet and the writer of this tablet, which, if I'm not mistaken, was a Babylonian scribe writing to an astronomer friend of himself in Greece. Now, a couple of things are special about this game. First of all, it is played with 4 dice that are tetrahedrons with different colored corners. Tetrahedron meaning it has 4 corners and 4 faces. 2 of these corners are of a different color. So if you drop any of them, you have a 50-50 chance that it is going to land with the colored side up. As you could see in the picture, in the original picture here, there's the tetrahedrons discovered alongside this board. Meaning to say, effectively, the way you would move your pieces is by flipping 4 coins in terms of, like, statistically how it works. Meaning you have the numbers 0 to 4 that you would possibly roll and move your pieces on the board with a disproportional probability. You are way more likely to roll a 2, less likely to roll a 3 or a 1, and way less likely to roll a 0 or a 4. Now, the thing is, if you look at this game and its description on Wikipedia, for example, you're going to see also the markings at the bottom. These were found at the Palace of Sargon II, and it has been estimated that maybe the guards who used to stand by that palace actually drew this on their post so that they could play it. So they potentially drew it with the end of their pikes or spears or whatever it would have been. So yeah, it would have been a very common game, a very popular game. It was found both in the royal cemetery and also, out by the guards. So aside from the dice that you use to move through the board, there are also 5 different flowers, rosettes, as they are often called, on this board. It was mentioned in the rule book that if you land on a rosette, you would roll again and get an additional turn. You're also safe on the rosette, whereas if you're not, if you're going down the spine of the board and an opponent lands a piece on your piece would get knocked out and would have to start the journey from the beginning. Again, that, the rules I said are pretty simple and somewhat familiar, aren't they? Because a lot of the rule set seems to be quite similar to backgammon and also Ludo / Parcheesi / Sorry, depends on who you ask. This game has been republished and repackaged many different times. And yeah, so hey, that sounds familiar. You roll dice, you move multiple pieces. Your goal is to get all of your pieces through the board and be the first to finish the game, right? These seem to be very common between the 2 games. So that's interesting. I'm going to also highlight one more thing, and it might matter in a matter of minutes as we're going through this little journey. Backgammon is often associated and assumed to have been created in my home country of Iran, or the geographical approximation of it. So as I was preparing to make my video on this topic, and hey, we got a little bit. We know about the game, we know how it was played, we know who translated it. That's quite a little bit. I can make a video about that. So as I was preparing to make that video, I brought it up to one of my friends who was kind of perplexed by what I just said. And who was like, wait a second, I thought the earliest made game in the world, or earliest board game in the world, was Iranian. I'm like, I mean, it was found in Iraq. It's not that far. But he's like, no. I was in a conference where someone years ago was telling us and showing us a board game and said that this is actually the oldest board game ever. And the conference he was attending was apparently on the burnt city, or Shahr Sukhte, how we say in Farsi, which again, just word for word means the burnt city, which is an archaeological site in southeast of Iran. And the person that was presenting that conference that my friend attended would very likely have been Professor Dr. Barbara Hellwing, who was on the archaeological team that discovered the burnt city and went through the findings of the burnt city. And the game he showed me was this. Now, this is peculiar, isn't it? Because this board looks basically exactly like the Royal Game of Ur, doesn't it? We have a part that has like 4x3 squares, a bridge with 2 squares, and another 2x3. Some might say it actually, in terms of like the number of squares and the placement of squares, it's actually identical. So this kind of opened up a huge rabbit hole for me, and I started to learn more and more about what this game was and about the actual archaeological site at the burnt city. Now, in Iranian resources and websites, it is uniformly called the first backgammon board ever found, the oldest backgammon board in the world. And I didn't love that ever, because it's clearly not backgammon, right? It's very much the same game as the Royal Game of Ur. So let's take a quick detour and talk about where this game actually comes from. As I mentioned, Shahr Sukhte, or the Burnt City, is in the Sistan part of the Iranian southeast, and it was discovered quite a while ago in early 1970s, and as you can see at the very bottom left of my screen, there's a paper on everything that was discovered upon that first excavation of the burnt city by an Italian-American archaeological team. So from what I've learned over the past little while, this city was basically used and then abandoned, used and then abandoned, and used and then abandoned for a final time, which means this city has experienced 3 different eras of civilization living there. And much like Ur, this board game of ours, our subject, was actually found in a graveyard. So I'm going to direct your attention to grave number 731 in the archaeological burnt city. And as you might notice, and I'm going to try to zoom in on this real quick for you, there it is. There's our board, documented in the paper that I showed you earlier by Salvatore. There it is. There's our board. It's right underneath the head of the man that was buried at grave 731. Now, grave 731 is actually of some more significance than just having been the site of a board game. A lot of really cool stuff was discovered here. At the very bottom, you see the bottom right, you see the picture that was taken from grave 731 as it was uncovered. But also, one more fascinating thing that was in that grave that's a little bit of a tangent, but I promise you it's going to pay off, is that there is a goblet also in that grave that seems to depict the world's earliest version of an animation. Now, this made a little bit of a boom and a bit of a news when it was discovered early on. What I'm talking about with animation is that on this goblet, there are multiple frames of a goat in the process of hopping up to eat some leaves off a bush or something. And, you know, if you rotate it, you're going to see the different phases of the goat hopping up to reach the leaves of this shrub. And you know what this means? Grave number 731 has a game in it. It has animation in it. It's very cool. So we're basically looking at world's first nerd. And I have a little bit of a site for you. This is what it looks like if you put all the frames of the animation around the goblet together. It's you might be able to look it up if it's not displaying very correctly. I think the frame rate may be too high for this. But anyways, there are some things that are different about this board, though. As far as the pieces are concerned, this board is shockingly intact. Not only the board itself, but the pieces were in a leather pouch right next to the board. And in that pouch were 28 different pieces. Now, you might recall that in the Royal Game of Ur, we had 2 sets of 7 pieces. In this one, we have quite a lot of pieces. Some of them don't look anything like they would be just normal pieces that would be used by one side of this game. There are boards that look like little triangles, and there are ones that look like little steps. There are a couple of pieces that we're gonna call star-shaped because they have 8 different divots on the side, a square one, a cone-looking, ivory-looking one. And so, you know, people didn't immediately put together that what these pieces are for. Multiple other problems or differences. You might also notice that this board is not as symmetrical as the board found in Ur. Matter of fact, this piece right here, now the resolution of the image isn't great here, but this is a head of a snake at the very bottom of the board, meaning the whole board could be recontextualized as a sleeping snake on a piece of board. So that's exciting and interesting and different. Also, as you might have noticed, it has normal dices. Well, not exactly modern-looking dices. They're not perfect cubes. They are rectangular cubes which get rolled instead of just, you know, shaken and then rolled the way we have dice right now. They don't have 6 sides. They have 4 sides, and their odds are going to be equal since they only have 4 sides. And one last interesting note about this is that the board itself is made of ebony wood, which is not native to Iran. That might come up later. So, yeah, let's keep going with this. And so I reached out to Professor Helwing to Professor Helwig and straight up asked her, hey, so there are a bunch of different articles in Iranian websites and stuff, and they call this a backgammon. This doesn't look like a backgammon to me. It looks a lot like the board that was found in the royal city of Ur, the royal cemetery of the city of Ur, and it looks a lot like the one that Professor Irving actually translated. And she responded, kind of to my surprise, she responded to a random email from some rando, and she put me in touch and on the trail of another different board that was also found in Iran that also seems to have been the same game. You might be able to look it up because it is published by Professor Youssef Majid-Zadeh in 2003. Now, this one was found in the archaeological site of Jiroft. Jiroft is also another archaeological site, also incredibly old. It is in the province of Kerman, which is relatively close to the last one, the last board in Iran, southeast of Iran. But this time it took us quite a while to find out what the board that was discovered in the archaeological city of Jiroft was, what the board looked like. And it turns out these are them. It's way more than just one board. You see, what took us so long to find was that these boards, they don't end the same as the other boards that I've shown you so far. They don't have the block at the end. There's always almost a 4x3 start to the boards, but there is no 2x3 end. It just goes all the way straight through. Now, the thing about it is, well, it's not always 4. There are sometimes 3. But the point is, with the majority of these boards, all right, before I get to that, these are the same game for the most part. The thing about that is, the archaeological city of Jiroft was heavily grave robbed. These graves were heavily looted, meaning we didn't end up with the luxury of finding older pieces to the games as they were being discovered. These were later confiscated from the looters and the grave robbers and put in the museum in Jiroft. So we have the boards, but we have no provable pieces for any of these games or for any of these sets. But as you can see, they were very lovingly, carefully carved. Again, something close to maybe 4,000, 5,000 years ago, and they are very well made and very well kept. And even though they're from rocks and a different material, they are still board games very clearly of the same variety. And one big piece of evidence about that proves that these are the same game is that the majority of these are also 20 squares, just as the Royal Game of Ur was, and just as the board found in the Burnt City is. So that's interesting, and it presented me with a better research opportunity, because once you look up a game of 20 squares, then there are significantly more resources to look into as to what this game is. There are a lot of these 20 square games that have been found all over the place in the world. There is a tracker. I have the link of it at the bottom of this presentation. I will also link to it at the end. I can post it for anyone who's interested to look into it some more. But basically, Ludi Games tracks the games of 20 squares that have been found all over the world. And as you can see, the markers on the map are these games. And also, the deeper and darker these markings are, the older the actual findings of the boards would be. And they're found, as I mentioned, all over the place. Some of the best kept ones are, of course, from Egypt, because of course. And this board at the top right, it's called Aseb. And this is one of the many sets of Aseb that was found in King Tut's grave, the very famous untombed pharaoh that was found, I think, in the 80s, maybe? No, maybe I'm wrong. Anyways, but yes, in the King Tut grave, we have multiple sets of both Senet and Aseb, sometimes on two different sides of the same board. One side would be Senet, one side would be Aseb, and there it is. It even has a drawer that you would put the pieces inside of. The second picture from the top is from Asha, is called Asha, from a Jewish population in the Indian city of Kochi, if I'm not mispronouncing that. And again, it looks a lot of the same, except for it is 5x3 on top and then a straight line to the end. So very similar, at the very least, to the other game boards. And this one was actually technically still being played all the way up until 1950s, when the Jewish population of the city of Kochi immigrated from India to Israel. And as you can see, a bunch of these boards were also found in the Israel, Jerusalem general vicinity. Now, as I mentioned, these boards are found all over the place: Iraq, Iran, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Cyprus, Crete, India, which I'm going to underline and we're going to look at in a second, Sri Lanka, and even more. The thing with that is India keeps coming up. Why? Because the nearest source to ebony wood that the burnt city had would have been India. There are no closer sources for ebony wood, which makes it overwhelmingly likely that at least the wood from the burnt city came from India for the board, and which means there were trade, which means there were probably cultural transfer of stuff like games. And sure enough, if you look into it, India has its own version of the same game, with the only twist being it's 4-player, and it is played on a board similar to this. Pachisi, if I'm not mispronouncing it, is a racing game with 4 players, and the rest of the rules are very much the same. Slightly different. There are multiple versions of this, as I will explain in a few moments. But most importantly, it was even name dropped in Mahabharata, the ancient Indian epic, as Pasha. Now, we don't know for super sure, or at least I don't know for super sure, if Pasha was exactly Pachisi, but, well, they got us covered because there's another version of the same game called Chopar. Chopar comes from India and might be the version that's played in Mahabharata. Excuse me about that. Now, the thing about that is Chopar is very, very similar to a Farsi word that is very well understood in Iran, and we pronounce it as Chopar. We don't pronounce the U in that word. And it refers to the earliest version of a post system ever invented in a empire. The ancient Persians had chopars, which were basically fast riders that would bring news to the king and to the different governors of different regions super fast. And yeah, so, you know, a racing game where you move multiple pieces through a board, chopar is, even if it's coming from some roots from Iran, it's not implausible, it's not, you know, imperceptible. It sounds reasonable. And just to I mean, to underline the obvious, Pachisi is where Parcheesi comes from, which again has been also translated to Ludo for the British audiences, and Sorry for the American audiences, and I don't fully remember the German name, but it starts with Mensch, and I know that because that's what we call it in Farsi. It's called, the translation of the word is man, don't get angry. Mensch, something, something. And just to make that even funnier, to the right, you might see something that might remind you of something. There are a bunch of snakes on that board. That's right. That is Snakes and Ladders, also known as Snakes and Shoots, which is also another game that very commonly gets shipped alongside Ludo / Parcheesi and stuff like that. That is a alternate version of Chopar called Gyan Chopar, if I'm not mispronouncing it, and that is from India. Meaning that this game was heavily modded by by the culture in India, and they also kind of, have 3 different similar versions of the same game. That's very exciting. That's very cool. And I'm gonna get out of this and tell you guys about what we ended up doing. So that one friend of mine that I brought this whole story up to is a game programmer, as I am a game designer, and we decided to remake this game. We eventually settled on 4 different versions, 4 different boards for this game. Naturally, the Royal Game of Ur, the Shahrsuchte version, the Burnt City version, and the Giroft version, which would be the Eagle. Our game's gone through many, many different versions and iterations. Initially, we designed the game. We wanted the game to be a 3D game. We still want the game to be for mobile platforms. And we figured that would be the most accessible. And the unique selling point of our game would be that we cover multiple different boards, not just the Royal City of Ur version, which is still very available, and plenty of versions of that game exists, usually not to so much of a economical success. But the point is, to us, this was a pride thing, right? It's an Iranian thing. It was found in Iran. Who knows? Maybe the earliest version could have come from Iran. So, it was a pride, nationalistic pride kind of thing for us. And we just wanted to have this restoration project and create this version of the game so that we could talk about it, we could release it, and, we would have online support for it, and people could play it and appreciate the history that was associated with the game. The game has been in production for quite some time. We are very, very nearly done with it. We're just working on the online version right now. But I'm still not done with this whole story for you guys. Allow me to check my time real quick. All right. So I'm going to try to make this as quickly as possible. As I was looking into it, as I was getting frustrated because I couldn't find any pieces or dice for the City of Giroft version of this game, I randomly came across a new mind-blowing thing. Apparently, another group of Iranians were looking into this, and they have proposed a new way of playing this game that is a little bit contrary to the way that Professor Irving Finkel has proposed relative to the Royal Game of Ur. So looking at this, I came across this paper that has been recently approved to be published. I believe it's not fully published yet, but it is in queue. the resources are linked. It is called the Analysis of Shahrsuchte board game with 27 pieces and suggested rules based on the game of Ur. So this paper goes into quite a lot of detail. Please feel free to look into it. It is written by Mr. Sam Jelve and Dr. Hossein Moradi. Mr. Jelve is a software developer and the man who has come up and proposed the rules. And Dr. Moradi is a member of the archaeological team at the Shahrsuchte site, and he provided the detailed information about the board itself. As what you're looking at is a reconstruction prototype that they have made, and they have proposed a bunch of different rules that would be appropriate for the different pieces that was found alongside the Shahrsuchte board, which is, you know, different than the one that was found in the Royal City of Ur cemetery. So these are them. And we actually had the pleasure of interviewing them individually and separately. And a lot of the stuff that I've been telling you about, especially in regards to Shahrsuchte itself, I learned from Dr. Moradi here. And the proposal was from Mr. Jelve at the left of my screen. Now, the proposal that they have for the game is that, as I brought it up, there are three major things that are different. One is that the Shahrsuchte board doesn't have the flowers on the board, doesn't have the bonus spaces. Mr. Jelve's proposal is that the star pieces that were found alongside of the board found in the 731 tomb, they were actually probably the same as the rosettes, meaning that you could lay them in the actual board and you could change the placement of their laying, meaning you could dynamically change the landscape of the board. That's the first major difference. There were three found, so his proposal is that they be laid like by rolling a dice, a couple of dice, and counting from the middle, placing them randomly so that the level of the game basically has some level of a, you know, change to it so that it's not the exact same game every time. But if you lay them down the same way as the Royal Game of Ur were, they would end up in the same positions as the pictures on the bottom. Second change that they're proposing is that instead of just going down the spine and up back the same pathway, you should twist it. Now, this isn't the first time that this has been proposed. They cite multiple different sources that they propose a different path through the board. But to me, the biggest piece of evidence for this twisting in the path down the board is that A, the head of the snake makes it be less symmetrical, meaning that the pieces would travel through the body of the snake and get spit out the head of the snake. And B, if you put them like that, if you lay them down like that, the spacing between each of the stars on the board is exactly 4. Whereas if you just traveled down the spine of the board and popped right out, the distance to the last one would be 5 between the last 2 stars. Now, if both of the pieces were traveling, like the picture on the right, again, you would have a longer route where the pieces are competing and they are in danger of hitting each other. And also, you know, it would be more exciting and more similar to the boards found in Jiroft and in Aseb and Egypt and in India. So there you have it. That's a variation on that makes more sense to me. Now, final change that they propose is a kind of a blocker system. There are 4 different pieces that were found alongside the ruins, and there were these square-shaped pieces, 2 of them-ish. One is more of a trapezoid. and then the ivory conish pieces. And they propose these pieces to be blockers. Their proposal is if you roll a 3, you get to move one of these, and you get to move them in the spaces that are marked in the pictures down below. So if you rolled a 3, you could either move the square or the cone. Personally, not a huge fan of this one. The other two make a lot of sense to me. This one doesn't. Now, in our playtesting, as we were developing our version of this, and we are incorporating these rule sets, you roll a 1, a 2, or 3, or a 4 to get your pieces in the board from outside. Now, you can't really roll a 1 or a 4 initially when you start the game because they are blocked, meaning you have to roll a 2 or a 3 to get your pieces into the board, but also 3 has the double function of moving one of the blockers, which means half of your dice roll are kind of meaningless at the beginning of the game, and it kind of grinds the pace of the game to a halt. Not a huge fan of this one, but this is their proposal. I also don't really see a very strong case for these being blockers. Now, they, of course, make the game more complicated, then they add strategy to the game, but they do suck the air out of the momentum of the players. Meaning, again, not a huge fan of this one. It is a version of this game for sure, and as we've seen already, the game has been modded over and over through the ages. Matter of fact, the clay tablet that Professor Irving Finkel translated was a betting version of the game. It was already being modded at that point. So there is nothing, fundamentally wrong with this interpretation. I agree with 2 out of the major 3 changes, but then again, this one doesn't really sit well with me. You be the judge for yourself on this. So they actually ended up having an event in Iran's National Museum about this game, and in that event, which I attended, and these are pictures that I took, they actually brought out the board from Shahrasukhta's museum, and I got to see it up close, which was super exciting. And that is Mr. Jelve giving a presentation, and in that presentation, dropping another bomb on us, which was that actually there is a third board found in Iran in a previously totally undiscovered and unconsidered part of the northwest of Iran in the eastern Azerbaijan province in Iran. And there's another board. This one was found in a residential building, not in a grave. It's not as complete, if I'm not mistaken, as the other boards. But there's the board, there's the pieces. They look a lot like the Shahrasukhta pieces. And wow, that's mind-blowing. That's fantastic. And, this journey still continues. We are still finding more and more of these boards and these pieces. And I think that's very neat. So in conclusion, this game has been around for maybe 5,000 plus years. And humans have always had this craving and need for playing. And it has been played by all walks of life. It has been used as multiple different implications. It has been remade, it has been modded, it has changed, and it has created many, many, many different experiences. And it all still talks to the human condition of wanting to play, wanting to entertain ourselves. And I think that's very awesome. Thank you for listening to me. These are some of the resources for some of the stuff that I used. And I am at your disposal for any further questions or details.
Yes, thank you very much for the presentation. I just confirmed with one of my parents that we have the royal game of Ur and Backgammon both back in my childhood home, stored away somewhere, but I do not recall. Yeah, but I do not sadly recall playing them. Now I have a reason, however, to search them up since there's so much rich historical background for them. So I'm actually excited for that. Yeah.
Nice.
I do have a question myself as well. Do you have a personal favorite version of the similar games that you have played, per chance? From the ones that you played.
That's a very good question. Again, in terms of gameplay, they are all very similar. I am the biggest fan of probably the board that was found in Jirov, the one that looks like an eagle. It looks so cool to me. Um, but also in terms of like the actual gameplay, I think the like a morph between the version that Professor Finkel has come up with and the one that is proposed. Basically, that is to say, the 4 dice, but also with the longer path and without the blockers, that would be my ideal version. I think that one's the most fun. It gives the most player agency.
All right. So you would say that even now they do hold up in terms of enjoyment when you play those games.
Absolutely, absolutely. It is important that well, the board from the Burnt City had 20 pieces, meaning 10 from one side, 10 from the other. That is going to be maybe an hour or an hour and a half long game if you want to play it like that. But if you do play it with fewer pieces, it is still very enjoyable and could be a very competitive, fun game.
Yeah, that sounds great. We also had a comment from Xenia, but it does have some names that I might be butchering when I would pronounce them, so I don't know if they would be helpful for me to say. Maybe Xenia can say them, or I can paste it in Zoom. Okay, let me see if I can make it happen. Okay, I'll try to say it and I'll write the names here just in case.
No problem.
Okay, not a question, but a remark for Faez. I have been speaking about consulting experts before. Here, feel free to read the work of Professor Suvik Mukherjee. I'll write them down. Who has worked intensively on the history of Chopar and other board games in and from Asia. He worked on historical facts about the games that you have tried, as far as I understood, to relate here, games that have several thousand of years between them. And so I'll write the name down as well.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Yeah. I will definitely look into it. Like I said, it's a bit of a rabbit hole. Like I kind of stumbled on it and it just like, there's so much to learn and all of it is so meaningful and so insanely cool to me. So yes, wonderful.
Yes, we also have questions, so I'll get to them as well. I'm just gonna post this to everyone. I hope to see it now.
Yes.
Okay, great. Then I'll just exit out of here. And all right. Then moving on to another question. Let me see. Considering that similar games to the Royal Game of Ur have been found across regions from the Middle East to India, could this game be seen as a cultural medium for exchanging ideas or rituals among these civilizations?
Right. Yes, absolutely. We also gathered from Dr. Moradi that some versions of this game were actually used for predicting the future and, ritualistic reasons, both in religious rituals, but also like haruspicy kind of things, trying to figure out like the future and stuff like that.
That's quite interesting about future. Okay. Next question. In the process of digitally recreating these ancient games, how much should we adhere to their original rules versus incorporating modern changes to appeal to the contemporary audiences? Could such changes risk losing the core heritage and authenticity of these ancient games?
So that's a really good question. To me, well, I'm a game designer. My priority is going to be to make the game itself the most fun version possible. But I think one of the things that I meant to highlight in my words were that what there basically is very little evidence as to what is the most authentic version of the game anyways, right? There are so many different ancient versions of this game that are seemingly even played with different dice, right? So even back in the day, even back 5,000 years ago, they were already modding it. They were already using different versions of the game. So what would make one version superior over the other? To me, as a game designer, the answer would be the most fun version, right? What you get out the most of this game. Having that said, the boards themselves are cultural artifacts, and they have significant cultural value in them. Like I said, not only is it name dropped in Indian religious mythological texts, but also it's found, maybe Senet itself is found in Egyptian paintings of thousands of years ago. So they carried a significance the whole time, right? So for whatever culture that you're looking at, there is some semblance of significance. The real common thing, as I mentioned in my presentation, is the human condition of wanting to play and wanting to engage with this kind of entertainment. But other than that, I can't really tell you what's the most authentic, what's the most, valuable. Just have fun, man. The whole thing has been about having fun.
Yeah, and I imagine whatever would be made nowadays, there's going to be years in the future when people are going to be looking at this version of the game and talking about its authenticity. So,
yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, we also have another comment. A super interesting talk. In quotes, modding, end of quotes, implies an original and porous software development language. These games have just been further developed by equals, and it speaks also to the part of the human condition to make games for each other. The authentic thing about the game is remaking it.
Mm-hmm. Very much so. Complete agreement for me.
Yeah. Well, with that said, thank you very much again for being here and talking about the sport games. And now all we have, left to do is to close the presentation. So, and those were our presentations. Thank you for your inspirational, thought-provoking presentations and discussions. Hopefully we continue with this important topic. There have been approximately, we've been trying to count all the viewers and the participants, approximately 100 participants all across platforms, including being in this hall itself. Thank you all. With the permission of the presenters, you can come back to watching most of the presentations later at our Facebook page. Thank you all again and have a lovely evening.